Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
I ran. Breathing hard, I turned a sharp corner in the woods, hoping I would lose them. Even in the dark, I knew these woods better than my own house. The short, stumpy tree there. Turn right. Huge oak tree carved with my initials. Turn left and a sharp right. If I could get to the creek and cross the water. I had to stop. Ducking behind the nearest tree, I leaned over and grabbed my knees. The stabbing pains in my side came sharp and quick. I knew I needed to move again, but my legs wouldn't budge. I sank to the ground, back resting against the tree's base. A twig cracked, maybe 20 feet away. Close, too close. I covered my mouth, trying to conceal my heavy, ragged breathing. They knew where I was, though. They always knew. I was so stupid. I could get on a plane and fly to Timbuktu, and they would know where I was. Running home had yet to help. Why me? What had I done? Why wouldn't they leave me alone? I pulled out my phone and stared down at the screen, the light shining bright in the dark woods like a beacon, begging them to come and find me. Tears brimmed in my eyes, and I didn't stop them from flowing down my cheeks. But then I got angry. I stood up from the base of the tree, one last look at my phone, and I chucked it as hard as I could through the trees. "Come and find me, you assholes!" I screamed at them. And then I ran again. Three days earlier. Ophelia Parish, the fine arts building on campus, was quiet and dark as I entered with my saxophone case in hand. It was close to 10 p.m., but I knew the building would be unlocked until midnight. I was tired from working at the restaurant, smelling of pizza and covered in grease, but I needed the practice. Working on my piece at home tonight was a no-go. Jess had a 7:30 a.m. Calculus class demanded that she go to bed at a decent time, and she didn't appreciate music quite as much during her sleepy time. Jess was my roommate, best friend from high school and a certifiable genius. A triple major in linguistics, psychology, and criminal justice sounded like lunacy, but I would support her in whatever she wanted to do. She appreciated all the sleep she could get, and I respected that. I passed Mr. Chris, the nighttime janitor for OP. "Working hard tonight, Mr. Chris?" I asked with a smile on my face. Mr. Chris Johnson was the nicest man you'll ever meet. He was a Truman graduate himself with several degrees under his belt. At least, that was the rumor. He never talked about it. The older gentleman smiled as he pushed his cart past.
"Probably not as hard as you, Miss Rachel. How's the piece coming along?"
He asked, his southern accent slipping through. I smiled back. "Recital is a month away. I've got work to do."
"Well, better get after it then. Can't wait to hear how it sounds."
"Thanks. Have a good night."
"You too, sis. And be careful walking back to the dorms. I hear some of them frat boys have been at it again this week."
"I will." I rolled my eyes as I turned to head toward the practice rooms. The Sig Toss was notorious for trying to scare freshmen after hours, hiding in the trees along the sidewalks and wearing creepy masks, trying to jump out at unsuspecting victims. The RAs were onto them, but these guys have been hard to catch. I walked up the stairs to the second floor, where the old practice rooms were. The new part of the building had just been built a few years ago, complete with brand spanking new music pods, but they had left the old rooms too, mostly for us seniors. We lovingly referred to them as the fridges, as the tall white boxes with clear doors looked much like oversized refrigerators. I'd been practicing in the same one since freshman year, and didn't plan on changing that anytime soon. It was like having a good luck charm. I had survived nearly 4 years of college as a music education major, so it worked. I yawned and set my case on the chair, pulling out the parts to put my alto saxophone together. Thinking about the senior recital coming up next month made my stomach turn. I wasn't a performance major, but all music majors, both performance and education, had to do a senior recital in front of the entire music faculty and any students and families who wanted to attend. My case of stage fright was a real thing. I'd been trying to work my way through it, remembering all the tricks my peers had passed along. Nothing was working. The nausea hit like a tidal wave every time I passed the auditorium, looked at my piece, or picked up my instrument. A knock on the glass fridge door made me gasp and jump, practically dropping the heavy bell to my sax. Jackson, a percussionist I'd known since we survived music theory together freshman year, pressed his nose to the glass and shifted his eyes back and forth, being a goofball and attempting to make me laugh. I threw an empty reed case at him as he opened the door.
"Why in the world are you here this late?"
he asks, dodging the case and popping his head in. His mallet sticks were in his left hand, so I assumed he'd been practicing as well. "Baking a chocolate cake," I replied sarcastically.
"Yum."
He eyeballed my music stand.
"Still working through the butterflies?"
My smirk disappeared. Not butterflies. Exactly.
"Then what do you call it when you're actively trying not to vomit while playing in front of an audience?"
Shut up.
"Hey, listen, Rach. I'm glad you're here. I've got something that might help,"
Jackson said, in a serious voice this time.
"Another percussionist showed me this app you can download."
He sat down on the small ledge leading into the practice room, using his backpack to open the door. He pulled out his Android and swiped the screen to unlock it. "Jackson, I'm tired. What does an app have to do with me being a nervous wreck?" I flopped down in the practice chair, slumping back.
"Let me show you,"
he replied.
"I even downloaded it to try myself."
I shook my head. "You, Mr. Extrovert?" Jackson held his phone up for me to see.
"It's called the Audience app. Somehow it works with your camera. Some of the guys in the computer science wing developed it. It projects an image of an audience onto a wall. It recognizes sound, so the audience knows when to be quiet and applaud. It's pretty neat."
He tapped on an icon and set his phone down on the practice chair. A light shone from his camera lens and cast a hologram of people onto the fridge wall. They were smiling, standing politely. An audience. "Wow," I said back, honestly impressed. I brought out my own Android and quickly found the app in the store. It was even a free download. "Thanks," I said earnestly. I really was a nervous wreck about this recital. Any help was welcome at this point. Jackson grinned back.
"Anytime. We've got music history in the morning. Now, get some practice in. Quiz."
I groaned. I totally forgot about that. Jackson threw up a peace sign before grabbing his backpack, and he left. The practice fridge was once again silent. I looked back down at my phone and hit the download button on the Audience app. It was finished within a minute. I sighed audibly. Whatever works, I guess. I opened the app and stared down at a black screen. For a minute, I thought it wasn't going to work. I disconnected my Wi-Fi, then reconnected it, hoping it would fix my internet issues. Still a black screen. I sighed again and put my phone down. The guys in CS needed to work on their bugs. I went to work on putting my sax together when I noticed a light shining under my phone where I had laid it down in the chair. I picked it up and noticed my flashlight seemed to be on. Wait, no. It was projecting. A small image of people shone onto the practice chair. I waved it for a second, watching the people move around on the wall near me. "Huh, it worked," I said loudly to no one. I propped my phone onto its side so the hologram would project on the wall instead. It was realistic, I counted 8 standing people, 4 women and 4 men, dressed fairly generically but with pleasant looks on their faces. They looked like they were attending a concert. "Well, I don't want to disappoint you all. Here we go," I said as I slipped on my saxophone neck strap. I had already set up my music stand, my solo piece ready to go. I attached the reed to my mouthpiece and began to play, letting my fingers glide over the keys easily and expertly. I had my piece memorized already, so I closed my eyes and just played, feeling the rhythms and notes. I opened my eyes and was startled to see the hologram of people still watching quietly. It was a little disturbing, I'll admit, but it seemed to be helping my nerves to play in front of them. When I got through to the end, I even hit the crescendo in the right place. I was pleasantly surprised at how well I had done. A slow clapping sound came from my phone's speaker, and I looked up to see my audience applauding me. "Cool," I said, an exciting feeling spreading through my chest. The next night I headed over to the practice building after work. I was excited to try the audience app again, especially after how much I felt it had helped me the night before. Earlier today, during my private saxophone lessons, Dr. Smith commented on how much more confident I seemed when I played. He was different from the kind of professor to hand out many compliments. I unlocked my phone and noticed a text message from Jess.
"Where are you?"
she asked. It hit me that I hadn't seen her much today. That wasn't unusual. We were both super busy, especially with finals and graduation next month. But we tried to make time to hang out. I typed back a quick response. "Sorry, getting in a quick practice at OP. Be there soon." I opened the audience app and once again got that weird black screen. I waited for just a second and noticed my flashlight came on again. As I did the night before, I propped my phone up on the practice chair, and the image projected again onto the empty wall. 7 people stood, awaiting a performance. Wait, 7? Is that right? I looked again. 4 men, 3 women. Wasn't it an even number last night? I should run over to the computer science wing tomorrow, see if I can track down whoever made the app to let them know how buggy it is. Then again, maybe the app is designed to change each time. What do I know? I continued with my practice, accepting the applause the audience offered me when I was finished. I packed up my stuff and hustled back to the dorms. 10 minutes later, I entered Dobson Hall. It was quiet, unusually quiet tonight. I looked down at my phone. 11:35 p.m. Quiet hours had already begun. I climbed the 2 sets of stairs to the 2nd floor and turned right to head for my dorm room. Something stopped me. For one thing, the hallway was dark. Must be a power outage, I thought. For another, I stared down the empty dorm hallway at the strange figure, only illuminated by the emergency lights. The figure wasn't moving, just facing me at the opposite end of the hall. I made a face and squinted. This person was a creeper. Surely the Sig Taus would need to be more stupid to try their tricks inside the dorms. But maybe that wasn't what this was. This person may need help. "Hello? Are you okay?" I asked. No answer. I took a few steps forward cautiously. I was sure it was a woman. She tilted her head and continued to stare at me, her hair falling to the side. She almost seemed to stare through me. It was unsettling. I spoke again. "Can I help you find something? Or someone?" Again, I am still waiting for an answer. We stood there for a moment, eyes locked. Then she moved and stepped towards me, her face suddenly in the light. Her movements were not smooth, almost jerky. She was smiling. not blinking. My eyes narrowed and tightened. This was incredibly weird. Okay, look. You seem like you might be lost. I'm going to find an RA to help you. I turned to do just that, but then I noticed her face. Really noticed her face. It wasn't normal. Not just the eerie smiling, the head cocked to one side, the jerky movements. She had streaks running through her skin. Purple streaks like lightning. Down her face, onto her neck, and down under the collar of her shirt. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't think. I just turned and ran to the other side of the hallway, desperate to escape. Each floor in Dobson Hall was built into the shape of a square, so if you got lost, you just walked around until you found your way again. I knew I could still get around to my room and call campus security if I ran the other way. I reached my door, 258, and scrambled for my room key. Dropped it. As I reached for it, my bag fell off my shoulder, slamming into our door. It suddenly swung open, and there stood Jess, looking annoyed. The panic on my face softened the grouch in her, and she was suddenly concerned.
What happened?
Jess questioned, as she reached down to grab my backpack for me. I snatched my key and the rest of my things and practically shoved her into the room. As I explained what I had seen, Jess's expression changed from "let's call the police" to worrying for my mental health.
Rachel, we're both exhausted. We have finals, and I know you are stressing about the senior recital. You've also been picking up too many shifts at Tony's.
Jess stood and held her hands out to me.
You need to go brush your teeth and go to bed. Come on, get up. You'll feel better after you sleep, I promise.
I sighed. You're probably right. Sleep sounds like the best idea I've heard all day. A satisfied Jess smiled and hugged me, then went back to her side of our double room and laid back in her bed. She was quickly snoring softly again. I went to the community bathroom we shared with the room next door. It was probably a drunk freshman. After getting ready for bed, I quietly climbed and lay down. My heart was still racing, but I felt better. She's right. I'm just tired. The following morning, I woke up to my alarm blaring Journey, the only music I'll happily wake up to. I gathered my school stuff into my backpack, saxophone case on the other hand, and prepared to spend my entire Friday in OP Hall. I left the dorm and turned left to walk down the sidewalk. With it being before 8 a.m., the sidewalk was pretty empty. Except for the two people standing in the middle of it, about 20 feet ahead of me. I stopped and just stared for a minute. The people stared back. This time, a man and a woman. They weren't moving, much like the person I'd seen in the hallway last night. Just stood next to each other, blocking the pathway, and stared. At me. They smiled. I squinted my eyes, then widened them. Streaks. Purple lightning bolt streaks ran through both of their faces. It was the strangest thing I'd ever seen. My breath started to quicken. What was wrong with these people? Someone bumped into my shoulder from behind and I jumped like I'd been shot. A girl passed me, obviously in a hurry, and throwing a quick, "Sorry," back at me as she adjusted her backpack and scurried off. When I looked back down the sidewalk, the man and woman were gone. I closed my eyes and put a hand on my head. They were there. I know they were. Am I losing it? I sat in class 20 minutes later, trying to listen to Dr. Jones's romantic period lecture. I couldn't. My mind was elsewhere entirely. Who are those strange people? Why do they stare like that? Why am I the only one who seems to notice them? I turned to stare out the window, people watching instead of taking notes. Some were taking their time, laughing in groups and meandering to class. Some were late. Some carried gym bags, probably heading to rec. A small group of guys threw a frisbee around in an open court. Pretty normal. Wait. I sat up a little straighter. There, beside that tree. 3 people standing still, staring straight ahead, heads tilted at odd angles. They were staring at me, through the classroom window. They see me. My breath caught in my throat. Before I thought, I gathered my notebook, pen, and backpack and walked out of class. Several students watched me go, and I even heard Dr. Jones get quiet. I let the door slam shut behind me, and I bolted down the hall to the bathroom, passing several people I knew who were calling my name. What's happening? Are those people following me now? Slumping down to the bathroom floor, I pulled out my cell and called the first person I thought wouldn't think I was crazy. My mom. She answered on the second ring. Since it was Friday, my mom insisted I call in sick to work and come home for the weekend. "I'll make your favorite," she said. I packed my bag and drove the 2 hours home. I didn't stop for anything. I didn't see any strange people on the way either. It made me wonder if it was a campus prank. The Sig Taus had upped their game. But why me? It was dumb of me to drive home and miss work and my extra practice sessions because I got freaked out over people in weird masks. So stupid. I was brushing my teeth that night in my old bathroom and about to go to bed. It had been a fun day, just hanging out with Mom. She's an author, so taking the day had been easy for her to arrange. We watched movies, ate too much ice cream, and talked. She made my favorite meal, spaghetti. It was delicious, as always. She agreed that I'd been under too much stress lately and just needed the weekend to recharge. I turned the bathroom light off and walked into my old room. Mom had left it the way I had left it before I went to college. My favorite stuffed animals are still in order along my headboard, just as they should be. I fell into them and felt relaxed for the first time in a long time. I pulled out my phone to check my messages before calling it a night. Jess had texted, "Just checking in." I checked the usual social media, then turned to plug my phone in. The light shone on something in the corner of my room. No. 3 figures of people. No. I shook my head and closed my eyes, convinced I saw things in the dark. Still there. Still staring at me. Smiling in the dim light. A man and 2 women, I thought, were in my house. They had followed me. I screamed and threw my bedroom door open, running as fast as I could to my mom's room. I scared her to death, I know. I pleaded for her to come with me, to come and see. I felt like a child with a monster hiding under the bed, but this was real. I knew it was real. And someone besides me had to see them. My mom followed me back to my room, but there was nothing there. I moaned in frustration and fear. I slept in my mom's room that night with her bathroom light on. I say slept, but I lay awake for hours. I watched for them. I didn't know what they wanted, or why I was the only one who seemed to notice or see them. But I was scared out of my mind. Why? Why me? It was a question I found myself asking a lot here lately. Ever since I downloaded. I must have dozed off because a scraping sound startled me. I looked at my phone. 3:15 a.m. I looked over at my mom, who was sleeping soundly, her back to me. What was that? My mom didn't have any pets except for her betta fish she kept in her office. I thought my heart would beat out of my chest. I eyeballed every corner of the bedroom and saw nothing. Cautiously, I got up, the bed squeaking softly. I turned my phone flashlight on. I would have checked under the bed, but it was a platform, so I knew that was okay. Scraping sound again. It sounded almost like metal, but it was coming from another room. The kitchen, maybe? My mom's house was a little small, so hearing sounds from room to room wasn't unusual. I tiptoed out of the bedroom and turned left to go down the hallway towards the kitchen. A soft light glowed from the kitchen. Mom had always left the kitchen sink light on for me as a kid, and the habit had stayed. I turned the corner to step into the small kitchen. 2 people stood at my mom's kitchen sink. 2 of those people with purple lightning streaks through their faces. And one was holding a kitchen knife. They stared at the doorway, at me, like they'd been expecting me, those permanent smiles plastered on their faces. All of the air left my body, and I did the only thing I could think to do. I ran. I ran right out the kitchen door and into the woods surrounding my mom's property.
Ricky was one sick fuck, as was I. That's why we got along so well together. We first met at Addison's Chocolate in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He ran one of the grinders, I ran a conch mixer. It was just a job. Neither of us set out to work in chocolate. Hell, after working at that place for a few years, most people grew an aversion to chocolate altogether. It was cool, though, to know we were making such a beloved product that was consumed worldwide. Could have been much worse. We sat together at lunch every day. They gave us an entire hour to eat, which most people couldn't stand. I mean, who the hell needs an entire hour for lunch? We would have much rather had half of that so we could leave half an hour earlier at the end of the day, but we didn't make the rules. What that hour did afford, however, was the ability to get to know a person very well. I mean, figure it out. An hour a day, 5 days a week, close to 52 weeks in a year. That's about 260 hours of bullshitting a year about anything and everything. We did have some things in common. We were both in our mid-20s, single, lived alone, and absolutely loved horror. Movies, books, comics, real-life serial killers. We just ate it up. It wasn't uncommon to be hit with a question like, "What's your favorite kill from the Friday the 13th series?" Which, in case you were wondering, I answered with the sleeping bag against the tree scene, of course. Or, who's your absolute favorite serial killer? Mine's a toss-up between Bundy or Kemper, depending on my mood. Those types of topics let us pass the time with ease. Our workstations were right next to each other, so it was easy to hear each other over the hum of the machines. So, Dave, serious question. Ricky looked puzzled, deep in thought. What's that? I had an idea it might be a good one. Ed Gein. Do you think he was mentally disabled, or do you think he understood what he was doing, especially with the wearing of the skin and such? Oh, definitely mentally ill. Just a simpleton who missed his mommy and snapped out. I'd actually contemplated this before. I think he just wanted to have that closeness with a female. Hence the titty vest, nipple belt, and a shoebox full of pussies. Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. He definitely had his ideas. That's why he's not a favorite of mine. He didn't have a solid plan or have his shit together enough to get away with anything long term. Ricky shook his head in disapproval. About a year or so into our friendship, Ricky started to miss work. A lot. Usually a day every week. I didn't think much of it since I knew Ricky liked to party. I wanted to keep his company at work, so I did inquire. He seemed a little surprised that I did. Well, Dave, I didn't really want to tell you about this, but I'm working on something at home. It's kind of taken a lot of my time. It's my pet project. Ricky was smiling ear to ear as he quietly divulged this info. What the hell is it? Are you making something? And why the fuck are you whispering? Please tell me it's not a fucking bomb or something. I was honestly intrigued. Christ, Dave, keep it down. And no, it's not a bomb. Definitely artsier than that. I can't really explain it here. You gotta see it for yourself. I mean, if you are truly interested. Ricky was sneering devilishly. Fuck yes, of course. With that look you got on your face, now I gotta see it. I laughed as I said it. Dave, one more thing. Can I trust you? His face became serious and stern, and he stared me right in the eyes. I nervously nodded my head, and we went back to work. I was no longer sure I should have opened that can of worms after all. It was the Friday after I had approached Ricky about his absence, and Ricky thought it was finally time to show me this project he had been working on. He insisted on having a few drinks beforehand, so we went to a local bar after work. We both got pretty hammered within a few hours, as neither of us would ever shy away from a drink. I was more of a vodka guy, and he was more whiskey. We went shot for shot until he decided it was time for this unveiling, as he called it. I didn't really know what I was in for, but I followed Ricky to his house, not wanting to be looked at as some pussy. As we arrived, I could see why Ricky was a bachelor. His house was small, dilapidated, and messy as fuck. Junk everywhere. I would have tidied up a little, but you know how it is. He pulled me by the arm before I could be too critical. He led me to a door at the end of the hall, which was closed shut. We stopped at the door. Ricky looked at me. Are you sure? I wasn't sure at all, but I nodded the affirmative anyway. He pulled a key from his jeans pocket, unlocked the door, and opened it slowly. What I saw was amazing. A huge black desk stood there, shimmering like polished obsidian, with 4 life-sized skulls on top of it in an arc shape. They were glowing purple as Ricky had installed a blacklight above the display. Holy fuck! Ricky, that's badass! I was impressed. Where'd you get those skulls? They look so realistic. This is the altar I've made. It's a work in progress, though. Much more to come. Ricky spoke these words with confidence and pride. What more are you gonna do? Put up some inverted crosses and shit? That would look killer. I noticed Ricky was looking down at the floor as I spoke to him. More skulls, more bones, but it's just so hard to find these girls, and taking them apart's a bitch. That's what takes up real time, and getting rid of the rest is difficult. Ricky raised his eyes to mine, expecting a response. I waited a little and then burst out laughing. I wasn't falling for it. Har, 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 you sick bastard. I moved towards the skulls and took one in my hands. As I lifted it, a tooth fell out onto the floor. As I heard it hit, with a clink, my heart fell and I instantly got sick to my stomach. I was not prepared for it. Not at all. Fuck, Dave, be careful. Now I gotta glue that thing back in there. You gotta be gentle with them. They're not toys. This guy was for real. I set the skull back on the desk and sat on the floor. I didn't know what else to do, next to the tooth. I was frozen for a moment, thinking about what to do. I was disgusted, but I was somewhat excited at the same time. This was the big time. No fucking around. Ricky was living it every day of his life. I know it's a lot to take in, Dave, and you can walk away if you want, I understand. But I've been thinking, I could use your help. We could do it together, our own special thing. And we've studied it. We could be great. Ricky's excitement was growing as he laid it out for me. Jesus Christ. I can't believe it. This is insane. I was losing it. I started to rock back and forth and hyperventilate. I don't know if I can do it. Ricky helped me to my feet and walked me out of the room. There's one more thing I need to show you, Dave. You have to see it. He took me to his cellar door, and when he opened it, the stench of death overtook me. I instantly vomited all over Ricky's kitchen floor. It was as if 100 dead animals were decomposing down there, rotting. It's okay, Dave. Get yourself together. You will get used to the smell, but for now, put this on. It'll still be bad, but it'll help. Ricky handed me a respirator, and I gladly strapped it on. Ricky guided me by the arm into his basement. My heart beat faster with every stair we descended. For a moment, I thought I was having a fucking heart attack. Part of me wanted to run, and part needed to see. And I saw, all right. There she was, some nameless woman, ripped apart, in pieces amid a dismantling of epic proportions. Her head was resting in a massive pool of blood on an old wooden table. One eye was already torn out, exposing the empty, blackened socket. The other eye was wide open and staring at me, and it looked as if the eyelid was completely removed. The blood-soaked hair was resting beside it, stringy and gluey and still attached to the scalp. Her deflated, wet-looking breasts were on the floor next to the chair, looking shrunken and bluish. The brown nipples so small they were almost non-existent. Black flies encircled the pieces of the poor woman. I looked away. It took a while to get into the swing of things, but as with anything, we desensitize and we adapt. Ricky was the mastermind. I was just his wingman and disposal assistant. I refused to kill anyone. It wasn't in me to do such a thing. But after that, anything was fair game. I became an expert at the bone saw. A person has absolutely no idea how much force it takes to get a human body apart. The sinew, the muscle, the bone, it really is an art form. And even after the fact, we still had to clean the bones and bleach the skulls, which were not quick processes. It literally took days to take care of one corpse. No wonder why Ricky was missing so many days of work. Weeks turned into months, and the women of Milwaukee were in an absolute fucking panic. Ricky tried to snag one every 2 weeks or so, sometimes with success. As the panic spread, the women got a little warier of Ricky's pickup tactics at these bars. Sometimes he would come home empty-handed, and we would just get drunk and work on our altar, maybe playing some video games afterwards. And, as we went along, we did decide to experiment a bit. The first part that we chucked into the cocoa grinder was a decomposed eyeball. Ricky threw it in nonchalantly as I was acting as the lookout. We were giddy as it was chewed up and disappeared into the bean grains altogether. Not a fucking trace. The next day, it was the tip of a pinky finger. Same result. We started to bring a pocketful a day to work. Teeth, hair, fingernails, pieces of skin. Anything small that we would love to see made into a candy bar of some sort. To think, someone in Europe could be snacking on a chocolate-covered eyeball, or someone in Scandinavia could be chewing on a milk chocolate toenail. It gave a strange, sick satisfaction to both of us. Seeing how many body parts we could send out the factory's door for human consumption was a challenge. This went on for months, and the cool thing was, it had never been done before. Unless I just hadn't heard of it, that is. The altar we were constructing was truly something to behold. It was a shame we had to keep it a secret between us because its grandiosity, however morbid and severe, was truly befitting of a museum. We used whatever we could of the bodies, but the bones were the most important parts and the bulk of the display. Skulls, arms, and legs were the easiest to work with. We dabbled with hands and feet, but the fingers and toes had to be wired together for support, which was just a pain in the ass. All of the unused pieces were either buried in the forests of Wisconsin or melted in acid. But it was worth it. The altar was a monstrosity that ended up swallowing the entire room. The skulls were the centerpiece, of course, but we had the arms set up so that they reminded me of dragon's wings, flaring out from each side of the table, from the floor to the ceiling. We were up to 13 bodies. 13! And then, out of the blue, it happened. A little girl from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania bit into a fucking toe bone right in the middle of her chocolate bar. I guess the grinder wasn't as foolproof as we thought. Obviously, this was a big fucking deal. Huge. We had made a mistake. The toe incident was all over the press, with video of the poor girl and her pissed-off parents talking about it on the news and showing off the bone on camera. The authorities knew exactly where to go to find out what the fuck was going on, too, as we were the only plant that supplied these bars. Within a day, they were knocking on the front door of Addison's Chocolate. All the workers were sent home, the factory was shut down, and Ricky and I were scared to absolute fucking death. We knew it was just a matter of time before they put the pieces together, and all we could do was try to keep our cool as best as possible. We made a pact to stay away from each other, and Ricky said he would begin to dismantle the altar. Meanwhile, forensic experts were inside the factory, emptying every grinder and every conch, getting ready to test for any traces of human remains. I was honestly formulating a plan to commit suicide when it came on the news that Ricky had turned himself in. I couldn't fucking believe it as his photo popped up on the screen. He confessed to every single thing. Took the blame entirely on himself. Didn't mention me at all. It's crazy how things work out sometimes. Every employee at Addison's had to make a statement to the police, which I also agreed to. I said I knew nothing of Ricky's exploits or his double life. I said I barely knew him at all, in fact. A part of me felt terrible that he took the whole damn thing upon himself, but then again, I think maybe that's exactly what he wanted all along. When all was said and done, Ricky had 13 bodies under his belt, no small feat, and became forever known as Mr. Chocolate. And the altar, he left it for the authorities to dismantle. I'm glad someone else got to see it and appreciate what we did. I think of Ricky often, as well as the adventures we had. Strangely, I wouldn't change a thing.
I'm used to mysteries in my life. I never met my mother, for example. My dad used to talk about her all the time, but she always felt like a pretend character, or like maybe she was just an ordinary best friend of his. Dad passed away a few months ago, so I can't ask him for any new details. He left me something in his will, though. It explained a lot that I hadn't understood before. There were still mysteries, but the Snuffbox has revealed more than I have ever expected to know. The portable steel container with a heavy lock on it was stored under Dad's bed during my whole childhood. Whenever I asked him about it, he would answer that it was his snuff box. He would always grin wryly, as though making a joke I couldn't understand. It was a weird kind of pun, I think. He never used tobacco, and so the only other meaning I could imagine was that it had something to do with killing. My father seemed like a gentle man, though, and so I chalked it up to English being his second language. I was given a key to the snuffbox as part of Dad's final wishes. After he passed, I waited a few days to open the container. Years of foggy guesses had made me hesitant to learn more. I finally opened the box, though, and was relieved to find that it only contained documents and photographs. They were all seemingly normal keepsakes. On top was a picture of Dad with my mom while she was still pregnant with me. It was the youngest and clearest photograph of her that I'd ever seen. Dad looked happy, just like I remembered him to be in life. Under that picture, though, were a dozen or so pictures of my dad alone. I wasn't in these other pictures, and neither was my mom. In every single photograph, my father's eyes were hard and hollow. He looked positively haunted by something in every picture taken of him between the years of 1961 and 1969. I was 8 years old when my father took me out of East Germany. I was 11 by the time he brought me to America. It's strange to think back and remember little snippets of certain days that the snuffbox documents. I don't remember my father killing anyone, but I do remember him leaving me in the car at a freight traffic checkpoint near the Berlin Wall. I remember sitting quietly while the engine ran idle for what felt like a long time. After that, I do recall my father hustling back into the driver's seat, looking grimier and less steady than he had been before getting out of the car. This is what I've been able to piece together about those years. These are the clues from my father's snuffbox. 1961. I know from my father's stories that I was born desperately premature, such that I was unlikely to survive. It was the summer of 1961, after all, and technology to sustain premature babies was crude and often completely unavailable in poorer parts of the world. Such was the situation in East Berlin. I knew all this already, but the snuffbox provided a few new details that I hadn't known. My mother had gone to stay with her family across town in West Berlin on August 10th. She was there to visit the relatively upscale medical and hardware stores so that a better incubator might be built for the still ailing infant me. In the snuffbox were hand-drawn designs for the incubator. The handwriting was not my father's. It could only have been my mother, who knew enough about medical treatment to create and build a contraption. On the morning of August 13th, my father called my mother and told her to hurry, because the border between East and West Berlin was being sealed by the Volksmarie soldiers. In the snuffbox, there was a blurry picture of 3 people dressed like soldiers in front of a tangle of concrete barricades and barbed wire. Partially obscured, behind the early Berlin Wall fortifications, is a woman I believe to be my mother. Another picture, dated 3 days later, shows more fortifications, and the same woman waving to the photographer from behind the growing snarl of hindrances. Even despite 2 soldiers standing to block her way, she's doing her best to be seen by my father on the other side. Dad still thought he'd surely see his wife again soon, after the confusion was cleared up. His diary entries at the time expressed this naive hope. There's little in the snuffbox from 1962, but the year after that included several important new documents that served as helpful pieces of the puzzle. In the far right corner of this second picture, standing on the East German side, is a man wearing neat and professional clothes, who's glaring out of the corner of his eyes at my father while he takes a picture. I wouldn't have noticed the man there, except my father circled him with a red marker. In German, my dad has labeled the man with question that was dated March 24th, 1965. Almost 4 years later, Dad apparently returned to this picture and asked himself, could this really be Carl Zeissen already watching me? 1963. I found more than a dozen documents from various months of this year. All of them seemed related in some way to my father's attempts to reunite our family. There were moments of fear and even despair in his journal entries from this time as well. Does she simply have a much better life in West Berlin? This was what he asked himself on the 21st of April. It breaks my heart to know that my dad imagined my mom abandoning us like that. That wasn't the truth at all, as it would turn out. The reality was much darker. Dad's first direct encounter with SSD officer Carl Zeissen would only be a taste of the frightening and awful things that our family would suffer at the hands of the East German secret police. I vaguely remember this visit, only insomuch as I remember a strange man knocking aggressively and then making himself quite at home in my father's apartment. My dad was distressed for days after the visit, and it was only after reviewing the journal entries that I now understand why. By my own translation, my father wrote, "Your wife has been classified as a Western agent," Officer Zeissen told me. "Her return to GDR would likely be a thinly veiled attempt at espionage. As such, she will be refused entry to East Berlin until the GDR has claimed the rest of Germany." "She's no spy," I told Zeissen. "She just wants to see her son and her husband." Zeissen scowled at my last remark. "You should be careful not to make me suspicious. Loyalty to a West German spy makes you an untrustworthy comrade." I begged him to consider that there might be some mistake. Throughout my pleading, Zeissen could only smirk and roll his eyes, and once even spat on my floor. As he was leaving, he added another comment I know to be untrue. "You may also find it valuable to know this," Zeissen told me just before slamming my door shut behind him. "There is strong evidence that your wife has taken to street prostitution as a way of fundraising for the FRG. I'm told by our informants that she cost as few as 16 marks for an hour to use her. He is a sadistic man, intent only on causing me pain with his visit, though it is veiled by claims of state business. I will not believe his lies. It is true that the Stasi was famous for its use of Zerzenzung tricks to break down citizens. They would only tell the most painful lies, and sow distrust wherever it was most damaging. What we call gaslighting in English was an art form in East Germany. I believe that Carl Zeissen observed my father to be strong, and simply desired that he be broken. 1966. 1966 was an especially deadly year on the eastern side of the Berlin Wall. Because we were still under GDR control, we wouldn't hear about it until much later. 12 people died trying to cross the border without permission. Of those 12, 2 were teenagers, and 3 were children. 11 of them died from gunshot wounds. The 12th was a child from West Berlin of 6 years old. He drowned after a playmate sent him tumbling into the Soviet-controlled Spree River. Because of the border dispute, those present from both sides of Berlin hesitated to save the child until it was too late. Things were reaching a fever pitch in Germany, and yet, even as the outside chaos was suppressed by the increasingly brutal state, things would still get so much worse in other ways. I remember walking into the apartment with my father one day to find it ransacked. Even my room full of playthings had been thoroughly destroyed. I'd been at school with my father at work. I helped my father clean up and check to see if anything was stolen. Nothing was missing, but everything was broken. It was clear, I remember my father saying, that the Stasi had done this to send a message to us. He must have been right, because later that night, my father's boss called him on the telephone to say that he had been terminated. Just before dawn, we were awoken by the sound of smashing glass and the clanging din of metal striking metal. My dad's car was totaled by men who did not rush to flee as my father confronted them. Instead, they approached, and one of the masked men extended his weapon, a heavy steel pry bar, to prod my father directly in his chest. I remember watching from the window, fearing that I was about to see my father die. In our driveway, the men exchanged hushed words that I could not hear, and then my father returned to the house, looking as white as a ghost. Father was despondent for weeks after this, but did his best to protect me from the fear that he was feeling. I remember his mood suddenly changing one day. He was previously depressed and meek, but suddenly he was focused and angry in a secretive way that I did not understand. Now, the Snuffbox has once again clarified things. In his journal, he wrote on October 2nd, "A furtive man arrived at the door early this morning and pressed an unmarked letter into my hand. The letter was in the Snuffbox, too. It was from my mother, saying that she loved and missed us terribly and desperately hoped to see her husband and her son before much longer. Some official on your side of the wall has apparently been turfing all my applications to come visit or relocate back to East Berlin," she wrote. "I've learned that he is called Carl Zeissen. I've been advised that he may be holding some grudge against you or myself, or both of us, because officials on this side say they've never seen such prejudicial termination of minor claims before. The last document, labeled as being from this year, is a page that Dad apparently tore out of his old school yearbook. An awkward-looking student with hard, glassy eyes was circled and captioned. The name beneath the photo read, Carl Zeissen. The caption my father added in red marker reads as translated, 'She never wanted your affection, so now you spite our family. Disgusting worm.' This was the final realization of East Germany's inequities for my dad. He became someone who was willing to murder if that meant leaving this place." 1967. It was July 21st when my father received his wife's death certificate. That was the first page filed in this year within the Snuffbox. The document said that Mom passed away from illnesses in late February, almost 5 months earlier in the year. If there had been a funeral, then we had surely already missed it. Mom was gone, and it had been a deliberate act on the part of Carl Zeissen that we missed absolutely all of it. There was so much water damage on the document that I could barely set about understanding it at first. At first I thought perhaps the letter had been allowed to sit in the rain, but then I remembered our old East German apartment building had indoor mailboxes and tiny, useless windows, which we rarely opened. Now, I realize, it couldn't have been the rain. I believe my father must have wept over the paper repeatedly, tormenting himself with it for days before he finally stored it away. Father drank and cried, and I remember this part clearly, without understanding why it should be stored so vividly in my young mind. I was witnessing a transformation in my father, and although I didn't then understand it, I could sense the magnitude of what was happening. After the grief had poured out of him for weeks, his despondent sadness and newly focused hatred for Carl Zeissen became a new and unified mood which frightened me even then. His trauma transformed into daily periods of wild focus at his craftsman's workbench. He was building something secret and terrible, which he would not let me see. When he was too exhausted to continue working on it, he would go into his bedroom and hide it somewhere even I didn't know about it. Under the floorboards, perhaps. He'd surely planned that even the Stasi, with their home invasions and careful surveillance, couldn't ruin this, his final plan against them. It was only upon reaching the bottom of the snuffbox that I realized what he had made. 1969. The most fascinating document in the snuffbox were the forged papers my dad used to cross the border. I remember how the guards had nearly waved us through, when suddenly there was some commotion that I noticed even as a child. Dad was told to leave me in the car and come with the soldiers for a short chat. Looking at the papers now, I can see that they were hastily forged. Spelling mistakes and blurred official seals were the best my father could do in imitating government permission to cross into West Berlin. These subtle hints of forgery aren't the most interesting. What's most interesting are the splatters of dried blood on the papers. The blood-stained sections are circled and marked by my father, and arrows from each brown-red speckle drew the eye to a single note written in German. This blood used to belong to Carl Zeissen, but he doesn't need it anymore. After the note, a grinning smiley face is drawn. Dad's diary entry, on September 6th of this year, explains in more detail about what happened on the day we escaped. I'll translate an excerpt here as best I can. The guards fell for my counterfeit documents, but Zeissen had been tracking me for years, and today's trip was no exception. He arrived just in time to halt our passage and demand that I be questioned more thoroughly. He insisted that he would interrogate me personally, and alone. I'm sure he intended to torture me before I was to be killed or else imprisoned forever. Luckily, I was prepared. I spent weeks fashioning my snuff tool, and I was already carrying it in my pocket. I found the snuff tool that Dad was talking about, too. It was something like a captive bolt pistol that he had designed to be fired using a gunpowder cartridge that was loaded inside. Dad must have cleaned off the bits of flesh and dried blood from the heavy bolt, because there was little evidence that it had been used at all. Inside the propulsion mechanism was the sooty residue of burnt gunpowder. The device had certainly been used at least once. Zeissen was in such a rush to begin beating me that he didn't have me searched first. He even ordered the guards to return to their post outside, likely so they wouldn't hear me screaming while he tortured me. This was a stroke of extreme good luck, because it allowed me to return to the car without anyone witnessing what happened next. After the door was closed, I approached with purposeful meekness, as though begging for his understanding. When I was within arm's length, I stepped forward and put one hand tightly over his mouth and pressed the snuff tool against the side of his skull near the temple. He knew what was happening, and so he struggled hard, driving a knee toward my groin and sending his forehead slamming away from the wall in an attempt to headbutt me. I resolved myself even further in killing him, but fumbled with the snuff tool as I drove it forward and triggered the bolt of fire. I'd done my best to impale his brain with my tool, but his squirming sent the bolt somewhere else instead. As I pushed him backward to retrieve the snuff tool, I saw that the steel intrusion had not penetrated the skull, but instead pierced through the front of his throat near his voice box. The choking, strangled wheeze of air that Zeissen hissed out as he tried to scream for help silenced him, but not dealt a lethal blow. Covering the new hole in his neck with one hand, he weakly tried to push past me toward the door. I followed and allowed him to retrieve his keys and move a trembling hand toward the lock. It was then that I pushed him down hard into the corner of the interrogation room. He fell forward on his hands and knees. I put one of my boots between his shoulder blades and made him rest flat against the smooth cement floor. Kneeling over Zeissen, I pocketed the snuff tool and instead filled both of my hands with thick fistfuls of his hair. I pulled his head up with all the strength in my arms, while my foot kept his shoulders planted firmly against the floor. I estimated that it took 20 seconds of this before a loud cracking came from Zeissen's neck. The pressurized hiss of air from the new hole in his trachea no longer wheezed out forcefully. When I untangled my fingers from the man's hair, his head fell forward limply and struck the floor hard enough to unleash some of the blood that was inside. The thick, visceral blood from his broken spine started pooling to fill his mouth, too, and out the new hole that my snuff tool had made. There was no more bright red droplets. Everything was congealing into the purple ooze of death, although I only stood over the dead man for what felt like less than 2 seconds. I collected my documents and returned to the car as though a simple clerical concern had now been resolved. The guards waved us through, looking down at myself after we were safe. I saw how much of Zeisson's blood I'd gotten on myself and smeared on the documents by mistake. The guards must have seen the terrified look in my eyes and simply assumed that the blood was my own. From Germany, we made our way to Austria, where we lived until I was 10 years old. My father obtained a worker's visa to the U.S. when I was 11, and we've stayed here ever since. My father never remarried, and I miss him every day since he's passed. But there is one thing that makes me very glad to know. In all the photographs that he and I have taken since moving to America, that haunted look in his eyes has never once made a reappearance. Losing my mother turned my father into something almost craven, someone willing to murder an enemy at a moment's notice if it meant not losing any more. After Zeisson died, and he knew that I, at least, was safe, I think my father returned to who he really was. He never wore that haunted look around me, never once during my childhood, and not even on his deathbed. The bad memories had been stored away somewhere safe, banished to the snuffbox, so that they could not escape until he was done being my father. His work is done now, and I'm glad to understand what he did for me. The picture of Dad standing next to my mom from 1961 is now in a frame by my bedside. The sadder parts of his story are locked back up in the snuffbox. I put the steel container under my bed, just like Dad used to do. I've set the bad memories aside to make room for joy, but I won't ever forget that they're there.
Early morning mist wraps the Texas highway like a burial shroud. A red BMW emerges from the fog behind us. I hold my breath and squint to see the license plate in the vanity mirror. It's from Colorado. I breathe out and lean back in my seat. So, when are we gonna talk? I pull my eyes from the mirror, but I can't look at David. It was my idea to move to Salem, my curiosity that led me to that book club. When we're safe in Mexico, the lie comes as a hoarse whisper. There is no safe place. Not anymore. His blue eyes glance at me only briefly before his hand leaves the wheel and finds my knee. I feed my fingers between his, and his focus returns to the road. He says nothing. He never does. My husband. His silent support is always there, lending me strength, respecting my freedom. For 5 years we've been on this journey together. If only I could tell him the truth. David points out a sign as we pass. We'll need gas in Bastrop. His hand tightens on mine. And maybe something real to eat? Every ounce of me screams no. We can't stop. Not until we pass beyond their reach. Please? He flashes me that look, those puppy dog eyes. I can already feel my resolve crumbling. We've been so careful, stayed off the main roads, eaten gas station food, and paid only with cash. There's no way they should be able to find us. But what if I'm wrong? They know he's my weakness, my whole world. I know he's the one who will pay if they find us. I don't know. We're so close. He elbows my arm and nods at a sign just off the road. They have an It's a Burger. I cough out a laugh. That's real food? Sure. His eyebrows waggle and I can't keep from laughing. He acts like we're teenagers on a road trip. But he's already pushed himself beyond endurance without even knowing why. My heart aches. That's who he is. That's why I love him. I told him I was in trouble, that we needed to leave. He didn't ask or argue. He simply shuffled behind the wheel and drove. 30 hours later, and he's still driving. No questions asked. He's amazing. Okay, I take in the dark circles creeping in under his eyes, and the last of my resistance melts away. He's given me his all. But only if we get it to go. Then I'm driving. I should tell him, but he'd never understand. To him, witchcraft is herbs, psychology, and sleight of hand. Something I do for fun. He has no idea the promotion, the new house, even his cancer going into remission last year was me. All of it, me. Consulting spirits, casting charms, making our lives better. Magic. At a price I couldn't pay. He pulls into the lot. I scan the license plates as quickly as I can. None are from Massachusetts. Of course not. I'm overreacting. My legs ache when I stand. The scent of overcooked hamburger hangs heavy in the air, and I'm acutely aware of my need for the ladies' room. David smiles at my little dance and takes my purse. Cheeseburger? I'm already halfway to the door. And sweet tea. I shiver as I enter the lobby. The air conditioner must be working overtime, but nobody else seems to notice. I find the restroom and open the door. A movement in the corner of my eye draws my attention to the mirror. As I watch, a name appears written in the condensation on the glass. David. I blink, and it's gone, wiped clean by an invisible hand. My heart stops. They found us. My hands shake as I fumble with the door latch. We have to leave now. I smash my shoulder against the door. It bursts open just as a man shouts, "In a restaurant? That's just nasty." David! I scream, sprinting to the crowd gathering at the register, but he's not there. Behind the counter, a mouse darts across a steel table by the fryer. Light glistens against something on its paw. I only catch a glimpse, but it's a gold wedding band. David. I shove my way forward and dive, reaching for him. David, it's me. But he doesn't recognize me. He bolts. For a moment, his body hangs frozen above the boiling oil. Then, time slams into motion. The scent of burning hair fills my nostrils. My legs crumple. Everyone is screaming. But they're not. It's just me. And I can't stop. I sit cross-legged on the bed, staring out at the yellow glow of the streetlights shimmering like stars against the pouring rain. Numb. Broken. Watching the world through a hotel window. Bastrop. I know I should have driven on. There's no guarantee they won't target me next. But I sniff and pull the blankets over my head like a cloak. There's no point. Everything I did, every spell I cast was for him. And now, my chest burns. I wipe a tear from my cheek just as the clock on the nightstand flashes to 3 a.m. It's time. I take a deep breath and stretch out with my feelings. A soft tingle brushes against my cheek, the familiar touch of his wing. Raven, my spirit guide's way of letting me know he's come. They found me, I whisper, letting my eyes drift to the top of the television where I know he's perched. Invisible. David's gone. But all I get out is a whimpering hum as I bury my face in my palms. David, I'm so sorry. My keys fall off the nightstand. Raven. I swallow the lump in my throat and stare at the place I know he is. What are you saying? He doesn't answer. Of course not. He's a spirit. I wipe my nose in the blanket and glare at him. Can't you just say something? Just once? I know that's not how spirits work, but hate having to piece everything together, and I'm really not in the mood. When he doesn't answer, I roll my eyes and lean over the side of the bed. But the way my keys are sprawled out tells me everything I need to know. 4 keys spread out in a cross, with the 5th in the center sticking straight up. A quincunx, a hoodoo sigil of protection. My heart stops. It's a warning. He's telling me I'm in danger. But he's wrong. We made a blood pact. We can't harm each other. That's why they went after... Raven taps his beak on the top of the television, interrupting my thoughts. I made a blood pact, I whisper, still staring at my keys. I'm an idiot. They have my blood. That's how they found him. A simple scrying spell, using my blood as a focus. I blink up at the top of the television. But the pact, they can't break a blood pact, not without a human sacrifice. David. It was poetic, efficient, my blood betraying my heart, crushing my soul and voiding the contract all in one ritual, torturing me before the kill, like a cat playing with a mouse. Hands trembling, I dive for my suitcase. There's not much left. I used all my charms to keep David safe, to keep him hidden. It never occurred to me to protect myself, that they'd find him through me. I rip open the zipper and fumble through the bag of herbs I keep for emergencies. Rosemary, salt, enough for now. Crushing the ingredients together in my palms, I mumble the best incantation I can remember and dump a sprinkle of dust on the floor at each corner of the bed. Then I reach under the bed and drop the rest in a pile under the center of the mattress, finishing the quincunx. Thank you, Raven. I brush the dust from my hands and dig my grimoire out of the suitcase. I don't know why they waited to strike, but they missed their chance. And now, I only have one reason to live. To make them pay. One by one. Rosemary. Time. I sigh and glance down the aisle of bins of granola, flour, and other organic foodstuffs. I don't know what I expected. A better herb section, I guess, but for now, this will have to do. I dump the thyme in the little plastic bag and slip the scoop back in its holder. Most of the essential equipment shouldn't be hard to come by, and I'm not entirely unprepared. I have my kit, my focus stones, and whatnot. What I'm lacking is ingredients. David. My chest burns. I had everything I needed. Everything. I used every spell, every charm I could think of to keep him safe. I planned everything. I knew Deb would be using her grandpa's map to track us. She had to have an emotional connection with it in order for the spell to work. If only we hadn't stopped. A little girl in a sparkly pink princess dress steps around the end of the shelves. Oh, with raspberries. I choke down the lump caught in my throat as I watch her bounce to a bin and glance back at the end of the aisle. Mommy! Hold on, sweetie. A woman on her phone pushes a cart around the corner, mumbling something about needing to reschedule. Don't forget your brother. I won't. The little girl stands on her tiptoes to reach the scoop. Mother and daughter. My throat aches. Twisting the charm around my wrist, I watch the girl's face knot into a scowl as she fights to shake the scoop free. It's her freckles, the way her curly red hair bounces as she moves, the blue ribbons struggling for all their might to keep it contained. I can't look away. She could have been mine. Pressure builds behind my eyes. I could have been her mother. She stretches out as far as she can, hops on her tiptoes and huffs, I can't reach it, Mommy. The mother rolls her eyes, still speaking into the phone. Well, see if Frank can make it. Without looking, she reaches over, slips the scoop free of the holder and hands it to her daughter. Then that's her problem. The bow holding one of the girl's pigtails slips loose. As if waiting to escape, her hair explodes instantly in a giant red poof. She freezes for a second, scoop still buried in the bin, and then, almost in slow motion, reaches up and slips the loose ribbon from the tangle on her head and stares at it. Mommy, it happened again. The mother glances at her daughter, smirks, then squats down, pinching her phone between her head and shoulder. I'm gonna sew these in, I swear. She finishes tying back her daughter's hair and taps her on the nose. My chin trembles and I turn away. She could have been mine. We could have had a family. David said he wanted a girl, a little girl with pigtails. A soft tickle trails down my cheek. I brush it away, but my fingers come back wet. I'm crying. I shake my head, forcing myself out of the moment. I can't do this. I can't let myself get distracted. I need to punish them for what they took. I owe it to him, to David. Clenching my jaw, I glance down at the list in my hand. I need a pack of needles and red thread, never been used. That part shouldn't be a problem, but I'll need to find a thrift store. I need a cloth of memory and heartbreak. Again, simple. Almost everything in secondhand store is full of memory. The candles, on the other hand, are going to be a little tricky. I need 5, and they have to be made of fat, not wax. Absently, I search the wall for the meat sign. Those I can manage, hopefully, assuming the butcher doesn't trim lean. But the final ingredient is going to be more of a problem. Blood, human blood, just a little, and it can't be mine. I stuff the list in my purse and march toward the craft section to find my needles and thread. Looks like I'm going to need to ask Raven for a favor. Closing the door behind me, I drop my purse on the counter by the TV and set the bags down on the bed. It took most of the day to track down everything, but I managed to piece it all together, even refill most of my reserves. I pull my kit out from under my pillow, open the lid, and spread the altar cloth out over the bed. Raven may be my guide, but he gets cranky if I don't take the time to do everything just right. So I need to lay out what I'm planning, every ingredient, so he can get a good look at each. Herbs around the edge, focus items in the center, and I tap my chin. I need something shiny just for him to look at. My gaze lands on my purse. Keys. That'll do it. I dig them out and drop them in the center and pull the reading lamp around so they sparkle. Better. I glance down at my watch. 11:45. Raven doesn't like being summoned before midnight, and I don't want to irritate him. Not when I need a favor. But patience was never my thing. And I have 15 minutes. I pick at a loose piece of skin by my thumbnail. What am I going to do for 15 minutes? My spell jar. I slip the silver chain over my head, unscrew the top of the tiny glass bottle fastened to the clasp, and dump the contents into my palm. Now that I have fresh herbs to work with, I can upgrade the enchantment. Adding sea salt and a few sprigs of wormwood, I offer a prayer to the goddess and slide the charm back around my neck. I don't know if she'll hear me. Deborah was the high priestess of our coven, but the gods are fickle. I settle down on the foot of the bed beside my ingredients, fold my legs to clear my mind. Besides, Raven is a messenger of the goddess. If she had abandoned me, he wouldn't have come. He wouldn't have warned me. The clock on the nightstand flashes 12 a.m. It's time. I lay the backs of my hands on my knees, press my fingers together, and stretch out with my mind. Raven, hear me. I beseech thee. Nothing changes exactly, but the air, the energy of the room, ripples. A soft tickle brushes against my cheek, and on the edge of hearing, Raven caws. He's here. Goosebumps prickle down my arms. Raven, dread guide and messenger of the shadow realm, here are the sacrifices I offer. I ask only that you aid me in my quest for justice. Just beyond sight, I sense Raven puff out his chest and hop over to my altar cloth. He swaggers between the arrangement, prods the wedding veil with his beak, and ruffles his feathers. My chest relaxes. He's pleased. I ask your guidance. I must strike them all as one, lest they slip from my grasp. Will you help me? How do I attain the blood I need? Raven tips his head, blinks at each item in turn, and shrieks so loud I almost hear him with my physical ears. I wince, but his meaning is clear. My spell isn't strong enough, even with the blood. No. A voice croaks in my mind, sending my fingernails into my palms. Dark deeds cannot be performed by creatures of the light, he says. Do not take this path. But I must. My eyes burn. He's never spoken to me before. Not like this. Only in riddles and half-guessed feelings. I didn't even know he could do this. I can't let them get away with this. I'll do anything. I wince at the pressure building at the base of my skull. Anything you say. Please, help me. Justice. Raven sighs. Always mortals willingly go. I hoped you were different. He hops over my needles and thread. So be it. You seek their blood? Then go. Find a creature of innocence, a beast that has done harm to no one. Take it to the cemetery. There, break its neck as a sacrifice to the goddess, and spill out its blood on the freshly dug grave you will find there. Then, and only then, I will know you are truly willing to walk the path of vengeance. 2 a.m, I squint at the etching on the headstone. Jose Garcia, born June 12, 1924, died September 2, 2019, the same day as David. My eyes burn and I look away. Raven? I should have known. What happens in the physical world and the spirit realms are connected. Magic is all about seeing the threads that bind, using them to weave our own tapestry. Pulling my cuff into my hand, I brush the fresh dirt smooth with my sleeve. The spell requires blood, the blood of vengeance, the blood of the victim, an innocent who died a violent death. David's blood. But David has no body, none I could use, so I need to improvise, and that's where Frank comes in. Kneeling before the stone, I press a single candle into the dirt at the base of the headstone, take 2 candles in each hand, spread out my arms, and stare up at the moon. Spiritus venti et cali, exaudi orientanium meum, exaudi clarumem meum, ut iustita restuatur et moriatur rius. Spirit of the wind and sky, hear my prayer, hear my cry, that justice be restored and the guilty die. Yin and yang, push and pull, light and dark. Justice is woven into the very fabric of the universe, balance in all things. Timete deum justeta, sorores prefixe sunt libra, fect me cohesio procium tuum, gladium tuum. Dread God of justice, my sisters have tipped the scale. I beg you, make me your arm, your sword. Vita as vitam. Beside me, the rabbit I bought at the pet store earlier digs at the floor of his plastic carrier. My voice falters. In innocentia solvid pro innocentia capta. Life for life, innocence paid for innocence taken. A soft breeze lifts my hair. A cold chill races across my skin, chasing a shiver down my spine. The spirits have come. They're watching. Without looking down, I reach back with both hands and press 2 candles into the dirt behind me. David's death was without justice, without balance, and balance must be restored. That is the way of things, the law of all magic. I plunge the other 2 into the ground by my knees, finishing the points of the star, reach into my jacket, pull out the palm-sized silver bowl I use for spell work, and place it between my knees. Innocentia pro innocentia. The spirits demand it. I slip my little brass dagger from its sheath on my forearm and plunge it into the ground beside the bowl. A lead ball sticks in the back of my throat. Somehow, I manage to swallow it down, open the cage, grab the rabbit by the ears, and hold him up against the light of the moon. He kicks, and my hand lowers. It's David. The rabbit represents David. Its blood will be David's as far as the spirits are concerned, which means, symbolically, I'm the coven. I'm killing David. A sob rakes through my chest. I can't do it. Even as a parody, I can't do it. Do you think Deborah, Kathy, and Allison felt remorse at what they had done? I glance over at the top of the headstone where Raven is sitting, like a shadow in the night, watching me. No, they rejoiced. After your beloved David died, They went to Gibraltar's for cocktails. To celebrate. Celebrate? The rabbit kicks, and I have to grab his body with my other hand so he doesn't wriggle free. I know. I saw. I sat outside the window. I watched your sisters raise a toast to your pain, your suffering, to their own cleverness at taking your love. Raven flaps his wings and hops to the edge of the headstone. Would you allow this injustice to go unpunished? Would show them mercy? He twists his head to stare at me with his other eye. Would you defy the goddess who demands justice at your hand? Would you sacrifice the spirit of your love? Deny him vengeance from the world beyond? No, I whimper. I won't let his spirit will wander forever, searching for the justice he'll never find. A restless spirit, a ghost. My heart cracks. I can't let that happen. I won't. No, I'll do it. Jaw clenched, I hold the rabbit up to the light of the moon. For David. I grip the rabbit's body in one hand and the back of his head in the other. Sanguis pro sanguine. I close my eyes. There isn't much noise when I twist, just a soft crackling pop and the deed is done. The rabbit kicks on for a while. It makes cutting him open difficult, and I don't get all the blood in the bowl, but enough to draw the pentagram with and a little extra. Enough for what I need. I light the candles one by one, offering a prayer to the goddess as each one sparks to life. Raven sits on the edge of the headstone, watching silently until the ritual is complete. But once the candles are out, after I've poured the blood into one of my little jars, pocketed his teeth, and buried the remains, he taps his beak against the stone. It is done. Your path is set, servant of the goddess. I give him a sharp nod as thanks and stuff my spell kit into my duffel bag. But I don't want his praise. I just want this nightmare to end. I want David back. Are you prepared for tomorrow? My hand freezes in the bag. Tomorrow? 3 and 3 must always be equal in power and unity. Dark as light to those who see behind the veil of secrecy. My shoulders slump. The scrying eye. I forgot. It can only be cast once every 3 days, which is why there are always at least 3 witches in a coven. So we're never vulnerable. But Deb didn't want equals. She wanted to rule, and so she kept some spells to herself. There's no way Kathy and Allison can cast it. It has to be Deb, and tomorrow is the 3rd day since David... A lump rises in my throat. I see. Raven grumbles. Then there is no time. Remember, mortals see through eyes tainted by hopes and fear. He ruffles his feathers, jumps from the stone, and flies off to wherever he goes when he's not here. It doesn't matter. Numbly, I jam my arm through the strap of my bag and slump back to the car. I know what I have to do. A single shaft of sunlight angles in through the crack between the curtains of my hotel room. It streams across my body as I watch the tiny flecks of dust float aimlessly in the light. Watching. Waiting. All at once, the flecks dance and swirl like leaves in a stream, moved by whatever ethereal currents stir them. My heart skips the next beat. Deb's here. Now. Watching. Blank-faced, I stare at the window and surrender to the pain. Numb, broken, David's suitcase lies beside me on the bed, his clothes wrapped in my arms just so I can feel him again, smell him again. The alarm clock on the nightstand flashes 2 in the afternoon, 12 hours since I completed the ritual. Nearly 12 more until I can summon Raven again. Shaking my head, I push away the thought and replay the nightmare in my mind one more time. David's body, suspended in time, caught midair over the vat of boiling oil. I tremble and press time back into motion, his body splashed into the fryer. My chest throbs, but I don't move on. I go back to the moment I saw the mirror and watch it all over again. I haven't slept. I haven't eaten in days. Not since David... My chin trembles. I clutch his folded straight razor to my chest just to feel it in my hands, to have a piece of him near me. The last time I saw him with it, he was standing by the sink at home, running this blade over his leather strap. It always sent goosebumps down my arms, seeing the knife at his neck. I hated it. I hated the size of it. I hated how it looked against his throat. I bought him countless razors and electric shavers, hoping he'd trade, but he never did. "You can't beat the quality," he said, while I stood in the doorway, heart pounding as he stretched out his neck and slid the blade down his skin. "There is such a thing as too close, you know." I winced. "Oh?" David smirked into the mirror. "I always thought I had the perfect face for headless." I folded my arms over my chest. "That's not funny." "It's a little funny." Laying the razor on the edge of the sink, his eyebrow cocked. "I mean, you don't want me to give you a rug burn, do you?" But I knew that look. "No," I said, backing away. "Ugh," he groaned, lather dripping from his chin. "I think I've gone rabid." "No, you don't." I turned to run, but it was too late. His hand caught mine before I even made it out of the door. "David, don't you dare!" I squealed as he spun me around. "David!" I threw my hands over my face to shield myself, but he went for my neck instead. Outside, a car's honk pulls me from the memory. I flip the latch on the razor, exposing the blade, and swallow. It really is beautiful. Ancient, but beautiful. I close it again and hold it close. David had to be the only man alive that still used one, but that was him. Unique. Special. God, I miss him. I sniff and go back to blankly staring at the curtain, the empty windowsill I swept clean of salt. Outside, the noise of traffic rumbles on, the low thrum of people going about their lives as if nothing changed. The world spins on without me, without him, as if he never mattered at all. The rhythm of life. There's no use trying to fight it. My thumb strokes the side of his razor. One flower dies only to have its place taken by another. Threads cut, threads retied, and life goes on without a pause. What's the point? Everything we think is important. Nothing. Our deaths, not even a pause in the circle of life. Why bother? Why not end it now? With his razor, we could be together, like Romeo and Juliet, together in paradise. The edges of the curtain sway and the flecks of dust swirling in the light go back to floating limp in the air, the way dust should. I lay there a few more moments longer, but when I'm sure Deb's gone, I toss David's razor back in the suitcase, dig out the salt, and pour a thin line on the windowsill. 3 days since her last scrying spell. 3 days before she can cast another. And what did Deb find? A depressed, suicidal woman suffering alone in agony. Exactly what she was hoping for. Turning back to my bag, I fish out my spell jar and slip the charm around my wrist, but it's hardly necessary. If I know Deb, she won't lift a finger against me now. As far as she's concerned, the longer I suffer, the better. But her turn is coming. I flop down on the bed, crack open my spell kit, and go over the ingredients one last time. I already know I'm ready, now doubly so. She won't suspect a thing. None of them will. Bins of bulk food tower around me like canyon walls, so high I can't see the top. Monkeys screech at one another somewhere high above me, and jawbreakers bounce off the linoleum, falling like rain. I pull the collar of my jacket up over my head to shield myself, but a familiar tingle ripples down my back. Not now, I hiss, and bolt to take shelter under a tree that sprouted from the walnut bin. I tried to take a nap after Deb left, but I couldn't sleep. Until now, apparently, since I'm dreaming. Shaking the jawbreakers out of my pockets, I glance up at the pink sky, reminding myself that we humans are creatures of two realms, the physical and the ethereal. When we're awake in the real world, we live in the dreams of our ethereal half. And our dreams are simply our ethereal side waking up in the spirit realm. The scent of cotton candy hangs in the air like fog, stinging my nose. I don't remember falling asleep, but it's not all bad. Holding out my hand, I catch one of the jawbreaker raindrops and pop it in my mouth. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, sewing the veil I bought into little dolls. One for Deborah, one for Kathy, and one for Allison. But David's here somewhere. I push the jawbreaker between my teeth, stare out into the dim green canyon, and sigh. Maybe he'll be drawn to me. Maybe. Unless he already crossed back into the waking world. The thought sends my heart racing. I can see him now, wandering the streets of Bastrop without a physical form. Alone. Frightened. Unable to speak. Unable to touch. A ghost. The thought makes my jaw clench, shattering jawbreaker between my teeth. The taste of mashed potatoes fills my senses. It congeals over my tongue in a thick, sticky goo. I have to wake up. I have to finish the spell before he gets to the physical plane. If I have to summon his spirit and perform an exorcism to put him to rest, things are going to get really complicated. I stretch the goo over my tongue and blow into a bubble. It floats out into the jawbreaker hailstorm and pops, releasing a giant fluff ball of red curly hair. It falls to the ground and rolls to the wall of bulk food bins just as the storm passes. 2 legs sprout from the underside of the hairball, followed by the hem of a sparkling pink princess dress. And before I know what's happening, the girl from the market stands up and tugs at her hair, trying to tie him back with a blue ribbon. "Hello," she giggles and tips her head as she pulls. "Can you tie bows?" "Sure." I walk over to lend a hand. One of the first things I learned studying magic is that because we live between worlds, we never see the truth in either place. The real world is just as distorted by the memories of our spirit side as our dreams by our waking memories. Whatever this spirit is, she's not the girl from the store. My mind sensed something she has in common with the girl, and so that's what I see. Taking the ends of the ribbon, I cross them over and gently pull it tight around her hair. "How's that? Too tight?" "Nope, it's good." She hands me the other ribbon. I take it and pull the rest of her hair into another tail on the other side of her head. "I was wondering." I pause as I tie the bow. "Have you seen a man around here asking for me?" She might not know. She could be anything, sprite or a wisp, or an incarnation of the goddess herself. In any case, it can't hurt to ask. "You mean David?" My heart stops. "You know David? Do you know where he is?" "Yes." She spins around, staring at me like I just asked if her hair was red. "He helped me get some gummy worms." David's here. My chest burns. I have to find him. Where is he? "Gone." "Gone? I don't understand. Gone where?" "To find you." "No." "Did he?" I swallow hard. "Did he find a doorway?" "No." She looks down and tugs at the hem of her dress. "Raven took..." "What?" A loud caw shrieks, cutting her off. I glance up in time to see Raven perched on the lowest branch of the walnut tree and fix his black eyes on me. "What are you doing here?" I fell asleep. I sputter. "I didn't mean to." He stretches his wing to adjust a feather with his beak. "You fell asleep." He blinks, seeming to notice the girl for the first time. "Ah." She shrinks behind me, putting my body between her and Raven. "Threads be here and justice there." Raven lowers his head and spreads wings in a way that makes my neck hairs prickle. "Cut one thread to make it fair." I flinch, but the girl steps out from behind my legs. "Please." She holds out her wrist, showing Raven the rune etched into her skin, the outline of a fish pointing up as if standing on its tail, the rune for bloodline and inheritance, the Othilla. "I have a family." "You be hers, so she be in you. Sins of the mother are all imbued. The innocent taken, innocence lost." His voice lowers to a whisper. "Blood is required. That is the cost." The girl lowers her arm, but when I look at her again, her hair is darker, her nose and cheeks not as round. I blink, but it isn't the girl from the market. It's Alex. It's Deb's daughter. She turns her face to me, but where her eyes should be, 2 empty sockets full of maggots stare blankly up at me. I stumble back, my heart pounding in my throat. "Wasted!" Raven shouts so loud the word echoes like thunder against the bins. "So much hope lost! Wake!" Dragging the word out in a lingering hiss, the bark under his feet smooths into scales. "Spin the accursed wheel!" My back slams into the bins on the opposite side of the canyon. It's not just his perch. Every twig, every branch slithers. Every leaf watches me with golden eyes. Snakes. I can't breathe. He's sitting in a tree of snakes. "Behold the harvest." He throws his wings wide and bodies drop from the canopy, dangling like fruit by a hangman's noose. Dozens of them, hundreds of them. My head spins. Something soft presses against my cheek and my whole body jerks. Heart pounding, I jolt up, covered in sweat. But I'm awake. I'm back. I'm in the physical world. Tossing the doll aside, I grab a pen and paper from my kit and scribble down everything I can remember before it fades away. I don't know if I'll be able to make sense of it, but I have to try. I have to follow the threads. Raven. It's been hours since I woke, but my hands still shake as I stuff the last of dried herbs into the final doll, stitch her closed. Snipping off the red thread, I toss a glance at the clock on the nightstand. 2:30. I lay her down beside Deborah and Kathy's effigies inside my kit and take a deep breath to try to settle my thoughts. It's not unusual for spirits to take animal form. They do it all the time. Some cultures even call them animal guides. They're supposed to protect you, give you insight and wisdom. But the image of Raven sitting in the tree of snakes presses in on me. I shake my head to clear the memory. This is ridiculous. I'm a witch. I know how to interpret dreams. It was the first thing I researched after Raven came to me. I can still quote the passage. Ravens, while often regarded as a bad omen in Western society, in dreams represent transformation and opportunity. They are intermediaries between the material and spirit worlds. Creative and playful, ravens can represent a return to a more youthful exuberance. Picking up the spool of thread, I tuck it away in my case, remembering how happy when I read those words. I smile as I slip the needles back in their pouch and drop them in beside the thread. If only all messages from the spirit world were that easy to decipher. A tree of snakes can mean nothing, danger from multiple enemies or awakening. A raven with a snake can mean healing or triumph over danger. A raven with spread wings means a major change. Adjusting his feathers like Raven did is usually an omen of death. I sniff and snap the sewing section of my kit closed, trying not to think about the bodies. I think death is probably a safe bet. And I do have multiple enemies, 3 of them. I'm about to send them to the shadows, so death and major life changes. It all fits. It's just... I toss the scissors in with the iron knife and sharpening stone. That's the first time Raven ever acted like that. The first time he ever scared me, even in a dream. And I know the druids didn't trust him. It's all over their mythology. Raven, or Fitik, as they called him, is a trickster, selfish, vain. Sometimes helpful, but other times vindictive and mischievous, like Loki. But then again, Odin had 2, Hugin and Munin. They flew back and forth between worlds, serving as his eyes on Earth. My stomach growls, reminding me that I haven't eaten in 4 days. I don't feel like it, but I need to eat. I'm no good to David if I can't move. Closing the lid on my spell kit, I fasten the latch and slip it under my pillow, but I can't get the image out of my head. I don't know what it is exactly, but something doesn't feel right. I just can't put my finger on what. I glance down at the frayed end of a piece of thread I trimmed off of one of the dolls. Red, like the girl's hair. My fingers go numb. Deceit. In dreams, red-haired girls always mean deceit. My head throbs. That doesn't help. I'm deceiving Deborah. It could just mean... No, the canyon, the bins, the jawbreakers, the whole dream was about her. And she had a binding rune on her wrist. I'm the one being deceived. Unless... My stomach pinches. It doesn't matter. I need food and I need to find a place to work. Someplace I can set up an altar. Someplace thick with loss and despair. Snatching my purse off the nightstand, I slip on my shoes and head for the door. I hate dreams anyway. What's the point of going to the spirit world if all they give you is vague cryptic messages that could mean anything? I drive aimlessly for an hour before I find an old abandoned farmhouse on the edge of town, the kind with the cellar doors on the outside. The roof is caved in, but from what I can tell from the road, the basement should be intact enough. It'll work. I turn around at the end of the driveway and head back into Bastrop to find some food. I can't go into the restaurant, not after what happened to David, so I pull through the drive-thru of some local sub shop instead. The weather's nice, sunny, warm, only a handful of clouds hovering like balls of cotton scattered on a sapphire sea. The perfect day for eating outside. It's already after 5 when I sit down on a park bench and open my sandwich. A few kids are on the playground across the pond. Their mothers stand in a tight group off to the side gossiping, oblivious to anything but their conversation. As mothers do, I roll back the paper and take a bite. Vinegar, oregano, basil. I glance down at the seasoning on the bread. It's a curious thing how much witchcraft people use every day without knowing it. How much passes without notice. I close my eyes and drink it all in. The taste of onion, tomato, and mayonnaise on my tongue, the lap of little ripples splashing against the shore, the gentle rustle of leaves in the trees overhead, the musty scent of the pond, and the way it mixes with the scents of Bastrop. A high-pitched laugh in the distance opens my eyes. Almost as one, the mothers cover their mouths, laughing at some joke or bit of gossip, blind to the magic all around them, oblivious to the sun on their skin, the laughs of their children, all of it. I swallow and take another bite, but my eyes burn. How many moments did I spend like that with David? Oblivious? How much magic did I miss? How much was taken? We could have had a family, future. That's all I wanted. To be a wife, a mother. Deborah. My chest aches and I rip the next bite free. It was one spell, one. And I'm the one who read it, not David. It wasn't his fault, none of it. Not that I couldn't get pregnant, not that none of the doctors we saw could help, not the price Deborah demanded in exchange for the fertility spell, and it wasn't David that snuck into her sanctum and copied it from her grimoire. It was me. All of it. Me. Not him. Me. One of the kids pops out of the end of the slide. She ducks, about to run around one side, but pivots and darts the other way as another girl rounds the corner chasing her. A little red-haired girl. I stop chewing. It's the same girl from the market, from my dream. Bastrop isn't that small. It can't be a coincidence. Someone, some spirit, is trying to tell me something. A soft flutter pulls my attention to a trash can chained to a post a little further down the path, where a raven is playing tug-of-war with a couple of blue jays over some bit of garbage. "You're it!" The boy screams and vanishes behind the slide, squealing. The girl takes off after him, but her foot slips and she slams into the side of the slide, hard enough the thud carries all the way across the pond. I wince and my gaze flicks to the mothers, but she's already on the move, running. I finish chewing, swallow, and take another bite, almost as if she was the one who was hurt. "Othilla," I whisper, but I think I understand my dream now. I was so focused on the pain, on David, that I didn't realize what Deborah actually took. They didn't just kill David. They took my life, my children, my future, my Othilla, everything. Killing them isn't enough. Shaking, I toss the rest of my sandwich to the jays. It's not enough. Justice means balancing the scales. That's what the goddess demands. They need to suffer the same fate. Innocentia pro innocentia. I snatch my purse from the bench and hurry back to the car. They started this, not me. And by the goddess, they'll live to regret it. It's midnight before I head back to the farmhouse. The broken silhouette stands against the moonlight like the carcass of some long dead, long forgotten beast. I swallow and pull my car deep into the underbrush. It's so overgrown, I don't think anyone's been here in decades, but the last thing I need is interruptions. Clutching my kit to my chest, I make my way through the darkness. No flashlight, no light at all. Tonight, the darkness is my ally. The stairs creak under my weight as I descend into the cellar and set my kit down on the floor. Spiritus timores et tenebrae exodi me, veni ad me. Spirit of dread and darkness, hear me, come to me. Only then do I reach into the pocket of my robe, pull out one of the candles I had prepared, and light it. The dancing light brings the broken beams and rubble out of the darkness. 2 walls are completely caved in, but the west wall, the one I need, is still intact. I wedge the candle into the dirt on the floor, pick up a few loose stones and stack them in 2 piles, and lay some of the broken boards on top. Stepping back from the altar, I can't help but smile. Moss hangs in sheets from the crumbling stone wall, the moonlight angling in through the cracks in the floor above me, thick with the air of forgotten memories and broken dreams. I couldn't have asked for a better place. I toss my altar cloth over the boards, lay out my silver bowl, the effigies of Deborah, Kathy, and Allison, along with all the ingredients I'll need. Dia noctus, susurrus mortis, audicosa, min pro ius dita, squame, tiu ab pervexe sunt, quasso, modo utis, deno exquorent. Goddess of night, whisper of death, hear my plea for justice. Your scales have been tipped. I beg only to set them level once more. Pouring the rabbit's blood, ritually David's blood, into the silver bowl, I pull back my sleeve and dip a thin brush into the half-congealed mass. Nulla lebus in sanguine qui effusis est lustita in morte nulla. There is no taint in the blood that was spilled, no justice in his death. Taking each effigy in turn, I paint their hands red with David's blood. Sanguis ius in minibus est. His blood is on their hands. I dip the brush in blood once more and paint the Othilla on their chests, per familias suas, on their families' hands. I take the needles I used to sew the dolls and dump them in the bowl of blood. Next, I sprinkle in a pack of rat poison, the rabbit's teeth, the match I used to light the candle, and few maggots I found in the garbage behind the hotel, pausing to set up and light a candle as I add each item. Once all the candles are lit, I take the brass dagger in both hands and stab the mixture 3 times, once for Allison, once for Kathy, once for Deborah. Before I even lift my blade from the 3rd stroke, the candles sputter and die. And so it is done. Raven croaks and all the candles reignite. The wheel spins on. I pull my dagger from the blood and he hops down from the shadows onto the altar. The goddess is pleased, justice is served, and David's death will be avenged. He walks over to the bowl, dips his beak into the mixture, and drinks it all, every last drop. Come, your spirit shall accompany me on my task, that you may witness the justice you have wrought. My neck hair prickles. I'm not sure I want to see this, but I bow my head anyway. Thank you, kind Raven. Only a fool would insult the spirits by refusing their gifts. Raven's body sways as he walks to the edge of the altar. Then sleep, and know that what mortals truly crave is not justice. Know it as I do through my eyes. My eyelids droop. I drop to the floor as quick as I can, but for a split second it's like there are 2 of me. The me lowering myself to the ground, staring up at Raven watching me from the altar, and the other me standing on the edge of the altar watching the woman in the black robe's head drop to the floor. And then I'm whole again. I fluff my feathers. Come, mortal. Raven's voice whispers in my mind. We have much to do. Without my will, my wings spread, but instead of flying for the opening, my head lowers and I dive into a shadow on the floor. Darkness swirls around me like shadows in the wind. I can't see, but I can feel Raven's wings pull against the shades as if they were my own. There. He flips our tail. Pinpricks of yellow light blink into the stars below, and we spiral down. Moonlight fills the sky above us as a large brick house comes into focus. One I recognize. Deborah's. We're in Salem. Raven's eyes fix on the cars parked in the driveway. Allison's and Kathy's. Book club. A laugh rumbles in our throat. Your former sister, Allison's daughter, is worried about her math test. They've gathered to ask Goddess to intervene rather than have her study. We flutter down and land on the living room windowsill. Inside, Allison, Kathy, and Deborah sit around a table holding Deborah's grimoire, hands locked together, eyes closed, heads back, staring up at the ceiling, their mouths moving in unison. Raven shakes our head. Fools! The goddess's favors come at a cost. Blood for a bauble, a soul for a kindness, and justice. Always mortals receive justice. He presses our beak through the glass as if it were the surface of a pond and caws. The needles from the potion I mixed, along with the maggots and rabbit teeth, float from our beak in a stream, real but not. See-through, like smoke. They float across the room, divide into 3 puffs above their heads, and drop into their upturned mouths. I watch, waiting for them to react, but nothing happens. Do not expect vengeance yet. Raven pulls our beak free of the glass. I assure you they will die, choking on their own lungs. But it is the goddess's wish that they know pain first. He turns and we leap into the night sky. Salem stretches out beneath us. Streetlights pass in blur. The scent of ocean fills our senses, and then it all crawls to a stop. A party. Raven grumbles as we take perch on a high branch overlooking another house, one I don't recognize. Music thunders from the open doors in deep resonating thuds. It seems your coven's children are all here together. Friends, even. He casually lifts a wing to straighten a feather, but his eyes are fixed on the crowd of teenagers dancing on the patio. These children have not wronged you. Lowering our wing, he shakes our head. Why do you desire justice? Do you not know what men are? He clacks our beak, spreads our wings wide, and caws. Desire mercy, not justice, mortal. The matchstick I used to light the candle flies from our mouth toward the house like a missile. The match hits the side of the house. For a moment, time stands still. The dancers stop, hands frozen in the air. The thud of the music stretches out in a long, deep drone, and then everything slams back into motion. Flames explode from the windows and doorways. Bodies tumble through the air and vanish into the night. The roar of the explosion shakes the tree. Boards and fiberglass insulation rain down all around us, but not a single feather ripples on our chest. It is done, mistress. Raven sighs in my mind. Justice is served and the cycle continues. Our wings sag. Do you not understand? Vengeance requires more vengeance, always. The scale tips with weight of your guilt, and so justice must be paid. But I don't understand. Mortals are ever fools. Raven croaks. Come, bear witness, and know what you have done. Turning our back on the fire, Raven jumps into the sky. We land back on Deb's windowsill, and Raven pushes our head through the glass. Slow down. I can't understand you. Deb rounds the side of the couch where Allison and Kathy sit, watching her pace, eyes wide. What? Deb rakes her hair back over the top of her head and moves the phone to her other ear. What do you mean the house exploded? Allison coughs into her hand. Everyone but you? Deb glances at the other 2 witches watching her, but she can't meet their gaze. Did you call 911? Allison coughs harder. Her face twists into a pained-looking scowl. Kathy's gaze locks on Allison's fist as she takes it from her mouth. Deborah! She whimpers, her voice climbing 3 octaves in a single word, but even from here, I can see the blood on her hand. Deb spins on her heel, and her eyes drop to Allison's fist. By the goddess! The phone slips to her chin. Jake, she gasps, her eyes scanning the room. Are you wearing that charm I gave you? Her eyes close. Good. Don't take it off, sweetie. Do you hear me? Don't you ever take it off. Deborah coughs, winces, and her chin trembles. I love you. Raven pulls our head back through the window, taps on the glass, and Deb wheels around, her gaze locking on us instantly. Justice served, justice required. Steaming the glass with our breath, Raven smears my name into the fog with his beak. The trap is laid, the cycle continues. Perhaps Jake will show you mercy, but do not trust to hope. We turn from the window and spread our wings, but before we leap into the sky, Raven pauses to shake his head. Oh, what fools you mortals be.
The 2 golden retrievers stared up at Walter expectantly. Behind them, their tails swishing back and forth on the linoleum like frenzied feather dusters. Buenos dias, Gigi, Walter said to the one on the left, the one with the distinctive white patches on her paws. Guten Morgen, Bella, he then said to her slightly larger twin. You ladies in the mood for some breakfast? Both dogs perked up at the word breakfast and issued a pair of impatient whines, which Walter interpreted to mean, Come on, human, you know we're hungry. Must we always play these silly games? All right, he said with a smirk. Message received. He turned around, slid open the pantry's bifold doors, and rolled out the large sealed bin that contained their dry dog food. Some sort of healthy weight Purina blend, he believed. He cracked open the lid and transferred 2 hearty scoops into each of their bowls. The twin Goldens did not wait for permission to dig in. Chuckling at their impetuousness, Walter rolled the bin back into place and drifted over to the coffee station that his wife Mary Ann had put together the previous fall, after seeing a similar setup in a cooking magazine. At the station's centerpiece sat one of those fancy Keurig machines, which was presently dispensing his first cup of coffee of the day. Perfect timing, he said, as the last of the coffee came sputtering out the device. Next to the Keurig stood a tray with a variety of non-dairy creamers and sugar alternatives. Walter selected the pumpkin spice bottle from the mix and was about to pour it in when someone outside began shouting obscenities.
Goddamn motherfucking shit-eating weeds! I'll kill every last one of you rotten sons of bitches! Just you fucking wait!
Recognizing the voice, Walter set the creamer down and went to the little window set above the kitchen sink, which Mary Ann had left open overnight. Through the window's insect screen, he saw his neighbor Preston standing in the strip of grass that ran between their houses, his back to Walter. As usual, the large, pear-shaped man was garbed in overalls and a mesh NASCAR cap. "Morning, Preston," Walter called out to him. Clearly not expecting anyone to respond to his outburst, Preston flinched in surprise and jerked his massive head toward the sound of Walter's voice.
Well, fuck me sideways,
he drawled.
That's you in there, Professor?
Walter pursed his lips at that and took a beat to formulate a response. Despite having repeatedly asked the man to call him Walt or Walter, the big galoot insisted on addressing him by his professional title. Initially, Walter thought it a respect thing, hillbilly manners playing out to the nth degree. Over time, though, he came to see it for what it was, a recurrent pot shot at higher academia, a middle finger to anyone who chose to work at a college or university, Dartmouth in Walter's case. Remembering this, Walter shook his head and said, "Who else would it be?" Preston barked a laugh.
Well, goddamn, man. You scared the bejesus out of me.
Sorry about that, my friend. Just curious what all the hubbub was about.
Hubbub?
Preston echoed indignantly as he approached the kitchen window.
Are you fucking serious? Can you not see my goddamn lawn?
Walter's glasses hung from a cord around his neck. He put them on and had a look. What he saw didn't make any sense. Instead of the lush haven of Kentucky bluegrass that typically lined his neighbor's property, there was now just a sickly expanse of light green grass, infused with legions of little yellow flower heads. "Good heavens," he said, taken aback by the stark transformation. "How long's it been that way?" Preston drew up his hands in exasperation. "Just noticed it this morning. Last night I put down a fresh layer of seed, and it sure as fuck wasn't this way then." Walter stroked his gray mustache and wondered about his own lawn. From what he could tell from his vantage point, there was still a bit of green, peppered with yellow on his side, but he reckoned it prudent to get a better view. "Hang on," he said. "I'll meet you out front." After quickly adding creamer and sweetener to his mug, Walter took a long swig of coffee and headed for the front door. Being their typically nosy selves, Bella and Gigi trotted along behind him. Outside, the bright morning sun shone brightly in the clear blue sky, its radiance blinding Walter as he stepped onto the wraparound porch. "Holy hell!" he said, raising a hand to shield his eyes. He considered going back inside for his sunglasses, but the dogs rushed by him and down into the front yard, so he abandoned the notion. Seconds later, Preston appeared to his left. Bella and Gigi rushed to greet the big man, rising to put their front paws on his hips and thighs. A dog enthusiast himself, Preston instructed them to sit, then knelt down and began rubbing their heads and bellies. Both dogs moaned in elation and fidgeted excitedly in the grass. "See what I'm saying?" he groused, scratching the dogs behind their ears. "Don't make no damn sense. I mean, you hardly do shit with your lawn, and you barely have any dandelions. Well, I work my ass off, even pay for extra lawn service, and I'm swimming in the bastards." A quick gander of the situation validated the man's assessment. "Well, how about that? Some textbook irony right there." Preston peered up at him for a length before letting out a loud guffaw. "Damn, Professor," he said. "Sure know how to undercut a man's ire, don't you?" Walter raised his mug in mock salute. "A talent that saved me many an ass-kicking in my day, believe you me." Preston grunted and ceased petting the dogs. Bella and Gigi whined their disapproval. "Oh, I believe you all right." "Well," Walter said, "if the situation was reversed, I'd give them lawn boys a call. Get them to take care of it for free." Preston mulled the suggestion over and nodded. "Know what, Professor? That ain't such a bad idea." He gave Walter the old finger pistol, winked, and headed toward his house. Bella and Gigi started after him, but turned around when they heard the front door creak open. Walter glanced back to find Mary Ann standing there in her pink nightgown.
"What's going on?"
she inquired. Walter told her. After scoping out the yard, she laughed and said it was weird because her friend Mia, who lived on the other side of Hanover, had just posted something on Facebook about the crazy dandelions in her own yard.
"What's more,"
she added,
"is a number of other friends have been sharing similar stories."
"Must be one of those years," Walter said. He gazed down the street and saw that other lawns on their block had been conquered by the little yellow weeds. Mary Ann touched his elbow and reminded him that it was Saturday morning. "So it is," replied Walter, "and we have an appointment." Mary Ann went back inside. After momentarily surveying the random clusters of dandelions peppering his own yard, Walter followed after her. Mary Ann insisted she wasn't an addict, but Walter knew differently. Facebook was her drug, and it had her, hook, line, and sinker. In perfect demonstration of this, not 2 minutes into their post-sex snuggle, she let go of Walter, plucked her iPad off the nightstand, and tapped her way to the older yet still very popular social networking site. "I think it might be an intervention time," Walter said as he pulled on his plaid boxers. Mary Ann tisked at that and spread her long, gray-inflected black hair over her bare breasts.
"We're a voyeur nation. Sue me."
Walter ambled into the bedroom's walk-in closet and searched his wardrobe for something to wear. Since it was nice out, he opted for slacks and a blue polo.
"Looks like this dandelion bloom is a bigger deal than we thought,"
Mary Ann declared as he dressed.
Everyone's commenting on it. The news is saying it's the biggest on record.
What, like in the area? Walter wondered.
No, like everywhere. Apparently, they're even showing up in places they don't usually grow. The deserts of Arizona and as far north as the Norwegian Bay in Canada. It's crazy.
Huh, Walter said, easing on a pair of brown shoes. Maybe I should give old Sam a call and see what he thinks. Old Sam was Samuel Clements, a colleague of Walter's who worked in the Biological Sciences Department at Dartmouth. He specialized in human physiology, but his lofty IQ afforded him the luxury of becoming an expert in just about any field he pleased. As it happened, he found botany and ecology very pleasing. While I'm doing that, why don't you get dressed? Maybe we'll take a drive out to Macoma Lake. Get some wine, maybe grab a bite at the ice house. Mary Ann powered the tablet off and set it aside.
See? I can quit any time I want.
Walter shook his head sadly. If only your students knew what a junkie you were. Probably lose your art cred. Mary Ann, who also taught at Dartmouth in the arts history department, chucked her bra at him and told him to go make his call. Careful not to press his luck, Walter grabbed his cell from the nightstand and moseyed downstairs. Samuel didn't answer his phone, so Walter left the voicemail. A half hour later, Mary Ann came down in a light blue summer dress and pink sweater. Walter thought she looked as lovely as she had on the day they were married, some 18 years earlier. Of course, there were less wrinkles, crow's feet, and curves back then, but Walter didn't mind. On the contrary, he preferred the added mileage. She was a real woman, comfortable in her own skin, and he found that sexy as hell. After getting the dog set up in the garage, they hopped in Mary Ann's Equinox and hit the road. The true extent of the Dandelion situation became evident as they made their way to the lake. All through town, yards were ravaged with yellow, and the typically green fields along State Road 120 had turned the color of sunshine. "This is nuts," Walter said as they passed several cars that had stopped along the side of the road so their inhabitants could snap pics of the curious phenomenon.
Kind of creepy in a way,
Mary Ann replied. No argument there. The Ice House was a winery and restaurant built upon the northern tip of Macoma Lake. It had been fashioned in the mold of an old English castle, and oddly, served some of the best Greek dishes in the great state of New Hampshire. There was a 20-minute wait for the restaurant, so they saddled up to the bar to sample some of the house wines. The bar's clientele was a mix of college students and lake area locals. Unsurprisingly, much of the conversation revolved around dandelions. One group of budding intellectuals at a nearby set of tables, no doubt Dartmouthians, debated possible reasons for the bloom's intensity.
It's the pesticide manufacturers,
a skinny kid in a black Henley proposed.
Monsanto, DuPont, Syngenta. Probably did something to boost sales.
Like they needed to, countered the guy outfitted in 90s grunge wear.
No, it's a side effect of climate change, environmental mutation. We're going to see more and more of it as things get worse.
The most reasonable hypothesis, in Walter's opinion, came from a well-dressed gentleman who spoke with a Jamaican accent. Don't get it twisted, man. They bloom just part of natural cycle, wherein heaps more seeds from the previous season survived the unusual mild winter. He took a swig from his pint glass before continuing. You'll see it all the time with other things. Some years it's ant marches in the Amazon. Others unwanted marine species showing up on the shores with the Japanese tsunami debris. Some years it's something like COVID that catch us all off guard.
Come on, man,
the Henley guy interjected with a modicum of disdain.
That COVID shit wasn't natural at all. Everyone knows it came straight out of the Wuhan lab.
Perhaps, the well-dressed gentleman responded calmly. There is certainly some evidence to support such a claim, but that's not the point here. Henley guy looked a little disappointed he hadn't elicited an argument.
And what is?
The well-dressed gentleman patted him on the shoulder. It happens, man. Who can deal with it? Most of the others listening to the conversation all laughed and nodded sagely. Henley Guy did not. Following a delicious lunch, Mary Ann and Walter returned home with another lovemaking session on their minds. Pulling into the driveway, Walter noticed several flustered young men with professional spray canisters roving Preston's front yard. Their T-shirts read, "JD's Lawn Service." Preston supervised the operation from his elevated front porch. Walter gave him a silent thumbs up, which Preston acknowledged with a smirk and a nod. As he and Mary Ann drifted towards their house, Walter absently mused that there seemed to be more dandelions scattered about his own yard than there had been earlier. He considered mentioning this to Mary Ann, but quickly ditched the notion. There was only one flower he wanted to focus on right then, and it sure as hell wasn't a dandelion. The next morning, after omelets in bed, Walter threw on his robe and meandered out to the mailbox to get the Sunday paper, which they still paid for despite everything being available online. There was just something about the feel of an old-school paper in their hands that made them resist going full digital. And it made sense that if they were going to get the Valley News delivered one day out of the week, it might as well be the Stacked Sunday edition. He was halfway back to the house when he noticed Preston standing near his own mailbox with his gaze fixed on his mostly yellow lawn. Walter called out a good morning, but the big man didn't seem to hear him. Figuring it best to let sleeping dogs lie, Walter shrugged it off and shuffled back inside. The following week was a busy one for Walter. Over the weekend, Professor Shipley, who taught period study, had fallen prey to an unidentified non-COVID respiratory illness. And Walter, who'd taught the course in the past, had agreed to take over the classes until he returned. During his rare free time, Walter repeatedly sought out Samuel to get his thoughts on the dandelion thing. Samuel, however, proved more elusive than Bigfoot, and it wasn't until Thursday that they finally crossed paths in the cafeteria. "There he is," Walter said as he sat across from his old friend. "Alive after all." Samuel, whom colleagues called Professor Twain due to his namesake, which was absurd considering he looked nothing like the famous author, with his mocha skin, gray beard, and bald head, glanced up at Walter with bloodshot eyes. "Walter," he said wearily, "I left a voicemail on Sunday. Never heard back. Everything okay?" "Swamped is all. Been investigating this Taraxacum enigma." Walter sampled some of the minestrone he had gotten and noticed that his friend had no food with him, just his laptop. "Figured as much. I'm interested to get your take on it." "Sure," Samuel said. "Well, from the data I've exchanged with numerous colleagues around the world, it appears a couple of things are going on, some of which you've already heard on the news, some of which hasn't been made public yet." "Yeah?" Walter said, arching an eyebrow. "Secret squirrel stuff?" "Not exactly." "All right then, spill it." Samuel reached up and dragged a weary hand down his face. "So, as you are well aware, in many other places there's been what appears to be a highly unusual bloom of Taraxacum officinale, the common dandelion. What's less known, because it's only recently been discovered, is that there's actually a new species in play." "A new species of dandelion?" "Correct," replied Samuel. He went quiet for a moment, as if searching for the right words, then said, "This species, it's clever, Walter. Structurally, it's damn near identical to officinale. So much so that upon visual inspection, even seasoned experts can't tell the difference. Fortunately, a team at Berkeley looked deeper and harder and found a whole slew of internal differences, enough to fully distinguish it from officinale." "Like a subspecies?" Walter said. "Or microspecies? Don't most plants have dozens of variants?" "Careful with your semantics there," Samuel cautioned. "Variants and subspecies are synonymous, but for the sake of this conversation, let's just say yes, they do. Indeed, officinale has upward of 70 of its own subspecies. But what Berkeley discovered, and others confirmed, is a whole different story." He grinned. "What's more, They found evidence to suggest this new species has been around for some years now, yet it was so well hidden that no one ever noticed. Not until this year's bloom demanded a closer look. Walter contemplated that, then asked how much of the new species was in the bloom. Nearly all of it. From the samples that have been examined, the occurrence of true officinale and its subspecies is almost non-existent. Somewhere in the range of 1,000,000 to 1. Walter frowned. Almost sounds like it's killing off the genuine article. That or suppressing it, Samuel said. What's even more curious, though, is that this new species is also mimicking other Taraxacum, like albidum, the white Japanese dandelion, and Pharonosum, the Turkish dandelion, which grows on salty soil in central Turkey, plus plenty of others. Walter's frown deepened as he ruminated on that. Wait, so you're saying there's a bunch of copycatting new species? No, Samuel replied. Outwardly, macroscopically, this new species is mimicking a host of different Taraxacum. To put it plainly, it shows up dressed like other dandelions, but underneath it's a wolf in sheep's clothing. Through intensive microscopic evaluation, researchers have revealed that all the imposters are the same damn thing. A tiny bell sound chimed on Samuel's laptop then. He clicked on something and his brow furrowed. Apologies, he said, closing down his laptop, but I need to get going. He stood up, grabbed his laptop, and began to stride away. After a few paces, he paused and turned back. Walter, when the fruit heads come, avoid breathing around them. Protect yourself, okay? Wear masks, KN95s if you can get them. Treat it like COVID. Before Walter could ask why, Samuel dashed through the cafeteria's exit and disappeared into the sunlight beyond. Bewildered, Walter stared absently into his minestrone and wondered what the hell a fruithead was. By the weekend, news of the new species made its way to the press. It was being dubbed Taraxacum immemorata, the last bit meaning hitherto untold. Contrary to what Samuel had revealed to Walter, the initial reports made no mention of the superweed's penchant for mimicry, nor did they accurately disclose the percentage of T. immemorata occupying the bloom. CNN, MSNBC, NPR, and CBS all said as high as 50%, while the more conservative Fox News and Newsmax offered much lower figures. As the weekend progressed, though, the disparity went right out the window. By Saturday morning, all outlets were reporting immemorata at around 65%, and by midday it was 99% across the board. On Saturday evening, a special news conference was held at the National Invasive Species Council headquarters to address the phenomenon. Near the end of it, a reporter asked why the percentage of the new weeds kept increasing, to which the NISC director, Mikhail Horowitz, blithely responded, "Because the amount of immemorata we're finding in our samples is increasing." The answer drew laughs from the other media members until the same reporter asked him to clarify, and Horowitz said it appeared the new species has been assimilating its Taraxacum brethren. A couple beats of silence ensued. Then the room was abuzz with waving hands and shouted inquiries. Dr. Horowitz dismissed them all and promptly left the podium. As he trudged away, a single voice rose over the rest and asked if there was any reason to worry. Horowitz left that one unanswered. Despite multiple attempts throughout the week, Walter failed to get in touch with Samuel again. The official line from administration was a leave of absence, but Walter learned from another colleague that the man had simply stopped showing up for work. The fruitheads, as Samuel had called them, began appearing on Sunday morning, far faster than the Taraxacum life cycle typically generated them. The vast seas of yellow rapidly turned white with sprinkles of yellow, and Walter, heeding his old friend's advice, went to Costco and purchased 10 boxes of KM95 masks. He would have bought more, but there was a strict 10 box per customer limit.
Sorry,
the befreckled kid at checkout had said.
The store manager is being a real Nazi about it.
Walter told the kid not to worry. Been here before, haven't we? And last time, 10 boxes would have been a godsend.
I sure hope so,
the kid said as a fight broke out at the next register over. Walter hurried off with his masks and didn't look back. On Tuesday, the doorbell rang just before 5 in the morning. It was Preston and his 7-year-old son Jeffrey in tow. Preston had on sweats and an undersized white tee, and Jeffrey was in his Transformer pajamas.
Need to talk,
Preston wheezed. Walter and Marianne, in pajamas themselves as well as KN95 masks, joined them on the porch. Preston started to say something but was interrupted by a terrible coughing fit. Walter directed the man and his son to the porch's wicker sofa, and the two readily obliged. Once the fit passed, Preston stared up at Walter with heavy-lidded, glassy eyes.
Being sick the last few days,
he said, absently scratching at his arms, which Walter saw were covered in little pox-like sores.
Me and Jeffrey on Sunday and Krista yesterday.
Krista was Preston's equally large and obnoxious wife. Jeffrey let out a moan then and leaned against his father. Preston put a meaty arm around the boy and tried to console him.
Easy there, pal,
he rasped.
Easy.
The boy shook his head slowly and moaned even louder.
Make it stop,
he begged.
Please, Dad. It hurts.
Walter looked over at Marianne, whose jaw tightened and lips quivered. While neither one of them had ever experienced parenthood, both were human enough to conceptualize how awful it must have felt to have an ailing child on your hands and not be able to help them.
It's the weeds.
Preston coughed as he itched at a fresh sore that had opened on his neck.
Sounds crazy, but I know it.
He followed that up with a long belch, and damn if Walter couldn't smell the odor of it through the mask. The odor of dandelions. Doing her best to appear calm and stoic, Marianne gravitated to the wicker sofa and put the back of her hand to Jeffrey's forehead.
Burning up,
she said, looking at Preston.
Your boy has a high fever.
Yeah, that was quick,
Preston replied.
It wasn't even 100 degrees 15 minutes ago. I suspect I'm in the same boat. So that's our cue to get going.
You need to get yourselves to a hospital,
Marianne said. She glanced at Walter, beseeching his assistance. Sure, Walter said. Preston, you and Jeffrey stay put for a sec. I'll just grab my keys and I'll drive you.
Already called 911, amigo.
Preston cut in.
I just wanted to show you. You guys been smart to wear them masks these last few days.
He inhaled heavily, emitting a harsh crackly sound, and rose to his feet. He helped his son get up, and together they staggered down the porch steps and onto the sidewalk. As Walter watched them shamble home like drunken zombies, Marianne disappeared inside and returned with a bottle of Purell. She squirted a generous helping into her palm and handed the bottle to Walter. Good idea, he said, slathering his own hands with the stuff. EMS arrived 20 minutes later. By then, Walter and Marianne had returned to bed, though neither was able to get back to sleep. When Walter heard the sirens approach, he went to the window in his upstairs office, which faced the street. Through a squall of red and blue flashing lights, he watched as the medics worked feverishly on the two bodies that now lay motionless on Preston's walkway. Marianne entered the room behind Walter but did not go to the window.
Do I want to know?
Probably not, Walter told her, which was the truth.
Jesus. Tell me anyway.
Walter sighed. Preston and Jeffrey are on the ground, and it looks like the EMTs are trying to revive them. They've got an AED hooked up to Jeffrey, and one of them is doing CPR on Preston. He thought both were bleeding from their heads, but it was hard to be sure amid the flashing lights.
Where's Krista?
Marianne asked. No sign of her, Walter said. The medic working on Preston abruptly ceased what he was doing and retrieved a rolling gurney from the ambulance. As he and the other medic loaded Jeffrey onto it, Walter thought he saw a bloody clump of something spill out of the kid's mouth. Before he could relay what he was seeing, Marianne grabbed his wrist and dragged him back to their bedroom.
I'm scared,
she said.
I don't need the rest of the play-by-play.
Walter didn't protest. Frightened himself, he crawled under the covers and clung to his wife. Through the rest of the morning, sirens wailed near and far. At 7:30 that evening, Walter's cell phone chirped. It was an automated message from the university saying all classes had been canceled until further notice. Minutes later, Marianne's cell phone received the same call. The messages compelled them to grab their iPads and start scouring the news. It appeared things had unraveled quickly since they had last checked. Hospitals in all dandelion-bearing countries were being overrun with respiratory patients, the numbers already surpassing that of COVID at its peak. Details were scant from the CDC as to the cause of the illnesses, but outlets from India, Spain, and Canada were reporting that taraxacum growths had been discovered in various organs of patients who had passed away during the last 48 hours. The claims were supported by hundreds of candid autopsy photos depicting lungs covered in the unlikely growths. Elsewhere, Walter found a video posted by a doctor from Jakarta who stated that the tea in memoranda seeds had proved to be extremely facultative, capable of taking root in a host of different environs, ranging from soil to wood to organic tissue. The doctor alleged he had seen stalks on the inside and outside of dozens of cows and dogs, plus over 100 human beings, all of which he noted had succumbed to the so-called infection. Thus far, he had not heard of any successes being made in terms of treatment. Walter paused after watching the clip and noticed that the air smelled of campfires. Normally this would have pleased him. Campfires always made him think of camping with his dad during the summer and the fall. Now, though, with all that was going on, it struck him as ominous. He got up and again went to the window in the office. He was disturbed to find that 2 of the houses on his street were burning, while plumes of smoke billowed from dozens of other houses in the neighborhood. The sight made him think of photos he had seen of war-torn cities in far-off countries, and it stunned him to think that something like this could happen here in New Hampshire, in the United States of America. Growing distraught, Walter padded back to the bedroom and flipped through several TV stations until he came across CSNBC, which was showing a segment on what worked against the weed. The go-to dandelion killer, glyphosate, supposedly had zero effect on it, as did 2,4-D. The one reliable method of destruction was fire. As such, the U.S. government had begun assembling massive fire crews to go out and conduct controlled burns. In the meantime, citizens everywhere were taking matters into their own hands with mixed results. No shit, Walter said, thinking of the houses burning on his own street. Marianne glanced up from her iPad.
Fire's here?
She asked, and he nodded. She got up and led him back to bed.
I guess it's bad in Australia, too. Practically all of Victoria and the Northern Territory are in flames.
All at once, Walter felt very ill. He went into the bathroom to get some Pepto-Bismol from the medicine cabinet. He guzzled half the bottle. When he came back out, Marianne told him she had been focusing on the what and why of it all in her recent online searches, but had only come across conspiracy theories and baseless conjecture. Terrorism, an experiment gone wrong, a governmental attempt to reduce the population, the first wave of an alien invasion.
Lunacy,
she said.
Both political parties are blaming each other, claiming it's a right or left plot to win back the seats in the House and the Senate.
Idiots, Walter said. All of them. Anyone offering any sort of helpful advice? The FEMA website seemed to offer the best advice. Stay indoors, seal up all household cracks and crannies. Conserve water and power where possible. It also noted that most of the power grids across the country were securely manned, but there was no guarantee they would stay that way. The workers and security details had families too. Acting on the second piece of advice, Walter and Mary Ann set to work preparing the house. They took the plastic sheeting they normally used to insulate the windows during winter and covered all windows and vents. Walter then duct taped around all the doors and stuffed towels in the dryer exhaust, while Mary Ann assessed the pantry situation. She estimated they had 2 weeks' worth of food stocked up. "Not bad," Walter said. "At least, I hope so. Who the hell knows?"
It's good enough for now,
Mary Ann told them, though she had no way of knowing whether it was or not. She glanced across the kitchen at Bella and Gigi, who were busy play fighting on the faded hardwood floor. Or rather, Bella was attempting to goad Gigi into a fight, but Gigi seemed unwilling to engage, choosing instead to lay on her side and do that growl whine thing she did whenever she grew tired of Bella's antics.
What about them?
Mary Ann wondered. What do you mean?
I mean, what are we going to do about them going outside to do their business?
Walter thought about it. Shit. Yeah, it's a problem. I'm not sure. The only thing that comes to mind is maybe seal up the garage and let them do it in there. Mary Ann deliberated possible alternatives but couldn't come up with anything better. After sealing up the garage and double-checking the rest of the house, they returned to the kitchen and discussed the idea of calling their families.
Just want to hear their voices,
Mary Ann said. They made the calls after a quick breakfast of bagels and juice. On Mary Ann's side, the news was all good. Her parents were sealed up tight in their Lake Champlain cottage, and her sister Dora was safe with her husband Rich on their ranch in Montana. On Walter's side, things weren't so peachy. His mother and older brother Stanley were fine down in Jacksonville, but his younger brother Nathan was in the hospital, lungs clogged with Inmemorata. They all knew the prognosis. Walter, who hadn't shed a tear in close to a decade, wept like a baby. "It's happening so fast," he sobbed after hanging up. "I mean, it's weeds for Christ's sake. Fucking weeds!" Mary Ann held him and wept too. Later on in the bedroom, they attempted to make love, but neither had much enthusiasm for the act. Instead, they resumed watching news updates and chatted with friends online. Just before calling it a night, Mary Ann mentioned her regret at never having been able to produce a child. It was a tender topic, one they rarely broached, but it seemed fitting to broach it now, as there was no telling what tomorrow might bring. Walter listened attentively. He expressed his own disappointment, but made it crystal clear that the feeling was aimed at the universe at large, not at her. He did note how screwed up it was that this new weed could take root in just about anything it wanted, and there were good couples out there like themselves who had to suffer the tribulations of infertility. Mary Ann patted his hand and pointed out that Mother Nature was neither fair nor nice.
She just is,
she added. They drifted off to sleep around midnight. In the absurd world beyond their window, fires raged and sirens wailed. Weak sunlight roused Walter from an awful dream shortly after sunrise. Fuzzy-headed, he staggered to the bedroom window and had a look outside. Through the clear plastic sheeting they had put up, he observed the bizarre sight. What appeared to be millions of snowflakes floating through the air. "Mare," he said. "You up?" Mary Ann twitched awake and sat up.
What is it? What's the matter?
"Wasn't it supposed to be warm today?"
Think so. Why?
"No blizzards, right?" Mary Ann blinked at him, then drew the covers off her legs and darted to the window. Registering all the white floaters, she squeaked like a mouse and dug her nails into Walter's arm.
Christ, it's those seed things from the, what did Samuel call them? It's the fruit heads. How in the hell?
As if in reply, loud gusts of wind howled fiercely about the house's eaves. Listening to them howl, Walter went to his nightstand's top drawer and snagged a pair of N95 masks. Marianne put hers on without question. Once his was situated, Walter turned the bedroom television on and flipped through the channels. Every major network had emergency news going, and most had at least one camera live streaming the seed blizzard. Evidently, waves of unexplained wind, perhaps induced by all the fires, had kicked up during the night, whipping the seeds from the many dandelion fields yet to be burned and casting them into the air. A masked meteorologist from ABC went off script and said it was almost as if the winds were on purpose. Walter switched over to BBC America and was stunned to see that they had put up a death toll counter. There was a note saying the figures had been culled from various sources and accounted for both dandelion and dandelion burning deaths. At present, the counter sat at 10 million in the United States. Global estimates were fast approaching 45 million. Unable to believe his eyes, Walter flipped over to CNN. The big story there was the U.S. government's successful deployment of National Guard and Reserve troops across the country to help local hospitals and assist local fire crews. Anderson Cooper was given the report in a hazmat suit and somberly relayed that the president had invoked the Eminent Resources Act, a variant of eminent domain, wherein the troops were permitted to use whatever resources they needed to combat the dandelions. As Walter watched the report, he heard a muffled pounding sound coming from one of the neighbors' houses. "God, what now?" he said, and hastened across the hall to the upstairs office to see what was going on. Through the hail of seeds, he saw 3 figures dressed in full military chem warfare gear, gas masks and all, huddled on Preston's porch. None of them bore weapons. At the curb sat a military ambulance. Krista soon emerged from the house and staggered toward the figures. They put their hands out to support her, then helped her down the porch's stairs. At the bottom stair, however, her foot caught on one of their boots, causing her to pitch forward violently, breaking her escort's grip. A split second later, her 300-pound frame crashed hard onto the concrete walkway, the force of which sent a gallon of what looked like yellow-tinned salad shooting from her mouth. "What the fuck was that?" Walter thought as her escorts descended on her, carefully rolling her onto her back and checking her vitals. Evidently not liking the results, they hastily swept her airway, gave her 2 rescue breaths with the ambu-bag, and began CPR. About 30 compressions into the first compression set, the CPR givers suddenly ceased their efforts and looked back at the 3rd member of their trio, who hung back by the ambulance. The 3rd member began making animated hand gestures, giving Walter the impression that the 3 were communicating via unseen headsets inside their suits. After a few seconds of this, the 2 working on Krista returned their attention to her. Together, they gingerly lifted up her shirt, revealing a nasty gash along her left flank, from which several dozen bloody dandelions spilled forth like tangles of freshly birthed cobras. A splash of bile gurgled in the back of Walter's throat at the sight. "Oh, fuck," he muttered, wanting to look away but forcing himself not to. The primary CPR giver stood up and stepped back as if in shock. Their partners searched Krista for a pulse. Finding nothing, they gathered up their supplies and retreated to the ambulance. The primary CPR giver clenched their fists and angled their face towards the heavens. Their whole body then trembled, and Walter was sure they were yelling or screaming. Before long, the trembling stopped, and the CPR giver ruefully joined their colleagues. Once all 3 had climbed inside, a 4th figure climbed out. This one carried a flamethrower. They moved past Krista's body and disappeared into the house. A heartbeat later, a great whoosh erupted inside and flames spread through Preston's living room. The flame-throwing figure reappeared on the porch and moved on to Krista. Another whoosh, and the large woman went up in a conflagration. As she burned, The figure with the flamethrower crossed themselves as a priest fighting a demon might, then went to work on Preston's lawn, starting in the back. When they were done, another figure came out with a different apparatus and sprayed a gel-like substance along the edge of Preston's yard that kept the flames from coming too far into Walter's yard. After that, they returned to the ambulance and moved on down the street. Slowly, Walter ambled back into the bedroom and crawled into bed. Krista is dead. Marianne glanced at the window. An emotionless air of acceptance swept over her.
Then Preston and Jeffrey probably are too. Your brother as well.
Though Walter knew he should have felt something at this, all he did was nod and reached the numb conclusion that if his neighbors were dead, and so many others were dead, then it stood to reason he and Marianne would be dead soon too. True, they had sealed everything up tight and wore masks, but who was to say they hadn't inhaled the deadly seeds before they took those measures? Or even if they were okay, the food would eventually run out, and they'd have to leave the house to find more. Surely the seeds would get them then. They looked at each other and removed their masks. It seemed pointless to keep wearing them. Early the following morning, a noise from downstairs roused Walter from a terrible dream.
We're inside! We're inside!
He cried out frantically as he came to.
Marianne, we gotta go!
Go where?
Marianne muttered, sitting up.
Who are you talking to?
Walter swung his legs out of bed and stood. He intended to grab Marianne and the dogs and find a way out of the house, which was on fire in the dream. As the seconds ticked by, though, the details of his reverie turned to vapor, and his reasoning for wanting to leave became fuzzy.
You, I think,
he said.
Now, I don't know.
Oh, babe. Sounds like you were having a nightmare. What was it about?
You got sick, and somehow the fire crews found out. So they showed up and torched the house.
That's awful,
Marianne said.
Our brains are such complex beasts.
Walter rubbed his eyelids with his thumb and index finger.
Something woke me, though. Some kind of sound.
No sooner had he said this, a loud whine followed by a high-pitched yip emanated from downstairs. Their eyes met, and an unspoken current of fear passed between them.
The dogs,
Marianne said, and they both rushed out of the room. They found Bella and Gigi in the mudroom that lay between the garage and the kitchen. Gigi was lying on her side, wide-eyed and panting heavily, while Bella stood over her, tail between her legs. Bella let out a hopeful whine when she saw Walter and Marianne, but quickly returned her gaze to her ailing sibling.
Foaming at the mouth,
Walter noted as he knelt beside the dog. The fact the foam was light yellow made his heart quaver.
I'll get us some masks,
Marianne said, hurrying towards the front foyer. She reappeared within seconds with a pair of KN95s, which they both swiftly donned. Tears streamed down her face. She knew what the yellow foam meant.
Please take Bella into the kitchen and close the door,
Walter said, fighting his own emotions.
I'll take care of Gigi.
He scooped the dog up into his arms and carried her into the garage, closing the door behind them. Bella howled when he did and strained against Marianne's embrace. But Marianne held her tight and dragged the old girl back into the kitchen. A strip of carpet lay in the middle of the garage floor. Walter placed Gigi on it and looked around the garage's interior, trying to figure out where they had fucked up. The culprit wasn't hard to spot. When they had sealed up the garage, they had used towels to clog the thin gap between the bottom of the garage door and the concrete beneath. A section of it had been pulled away, as evidenced by the filament of sunlight highlighting the gap. Near it sat clumps of white fruit heads.
Oh, you silly mutt,
Walter murmured.
Why'd you go and do that?
Gigi replied by vomiting a pile of green stalks and dandelion heads. When she was finished, she expelled a loud whimper and shut her eyes. Walter stroked her neck, eliciting a single thump of her tail. "I'm so sorry, beautiful girl," Walter said, feeling powerless to help. "This isn't right." Behind him, the door leading to the kitchen creaked open and shut, and Mary Ann came padding over to them. She sat across from Walter, so that Gigi lay between them. She put a trembling hand on the dog's head and leaned forward to whisper loving words into her ear. Inside the house, Bella barked and howled and scratched furiously at the mudroom door, trying to get to Gigi. The anguish in her howling was as real as anything Walter or Mary Ann felt. "It's okay, pup. It's okay," Walter said over and over. Except it wasn't okay. Not then and not a half hour later when Gigi began to gasp and shudder violently, spitting up blood. Certainly not minutes after that when her side split open and dandelions came pouring out of every orifice. Mary Ann clambered back inside when the shuddering started, choosing instead to comfort Bella while Walter stayed by Gigi's side. At one point, Walter seriously considered grabbing his Glock 19 from the bedroom safe to end the animal's misery. But he didn't want to leave her alone, not even for the short time it would have taken to retrieve it. He owed the dog that much. Once the awfulness had passed and Gigi lay still and quiet, Walter collapsed onto his back and allowed his spiraling emotions to run their course. How long that took, he couldn't say. All he knew was at the end of it, Mary Ann called out to him through the mudroom door, nervously asking for a status update. "She's gone," he told her, glancing down at the gruesome mess that was Gigi's body. "Mare, please don't come out here. It's not good." There was a shuffling sound on the other side of the door, followed by a stretch of silence. When Mary Ann finally spoke, her words were laced with venom and rancor.
"God damn it, Walter,"
she seethed.
"Why is this happening to us? Why did it happen to our poor sweet girl? Who the fuck is in charge up there?"
Walter inhaled through his nostrils and exhaled through his mouth. The old smell the flowers, blow out the candles trick, which always helped center him. "Been wondering that myself, babe. But you know there's no answer. Mystical, spiritual, or otherwise." Mary Ann uttered something incomprehensible before assuring him she understood.
"I'm sorry. I'm just a wreck, my husband. Nothing is right. I think I'm going to take Bella upstairs and just hold her. She needs it. And I know I need it."
"Good idea," Walter said. "I'll join you in a while. There's quite a bit of cleanup to do."
"Oh,"
Mary Ann said.
"Need anything from in here?"
Walter scanned the chrome wire shelving units that spanned the garage's rear wall. With the exception of bleach, everything he needed was there. He relayed this info to Mary Ann, who pledged to find him a bottle and leave it in the mudroom. "Thanks, Mare. I love you," he said, and set to work cleaning up. All told, he spent the next hour and 15 minutes tending to his grim task. Incredibly, each part of the process proved as difficult as the last. Clearing out the loads of food from the garage's freezer, carefully separating all the dandelion excretions from Gigi's body, placing them in the metal burn bin, triple bagging the dog in 60-gallon trash bags, loading her into the freezer, making her fit, mopping up the fruit heads that had snuck in through the garage door's exposed gap, adding the detritus to the burn bin and burning everything dandelion related. Then lastly, bleaching every visible surface. Afterwards, Walter trudged his way back upstairs and took a lengthy shower. He ran the water hot and lingered under the shower head until the streamlets ran cold. Mary Ann and Bella were waiting for him when he came out in a fresh set of pajamas. Bella wagged her tail when Walter slipped under the covers and issued a soft, dejected mew when he stroked her neck. "I know, sweet girl," Walter said, eyes growing moist again. "I know." 2 long and blurry weeks later, a military ambulance pulled up in front of their house. 3 chem-suited figures got out and knocked on the front door. When they didn't get a response, the largest of the 3 reared back to kick the door in, but stopped short when he saw Walter's gaunt face appear in the door's small window. One of the other figures held up a sign asking if anyone in the house was infected. Walter shook his head no. He went and got a pen and a notepad and wrote, "Hungry. Wondering what happened to internet." Cable and internet had gone down the week prior. The 3 figures turned to each other and did something that surprised Walter. They gave each other high fives. Then the largest held up a finger as if to say, "Wait a minute," and ran back to their vehicle. He returned with a large box, from which he extracted a collection of green tarps, tent poles, duct tape, and power tools. With the other 2's help, he used the items to erect a small tarp chamber with a zip flap on one side, then attached the chamber to the house's front door. After sealing it up with duct tape, he showed Walter a note that read, "Decon Chamber." One of the others went and got another sizable box and put it in the chamber. The large guy held up another note to Walter with instructions. When Walter showed his acknowledgement, the figure sprayed down the box with a gelatinous substance, waved goodbye, and exited the chamber, sealing it as he stepped out. Every 4 days for the next 2 months, the same 3 figures came back with a new box. The boxes were filled with MREs, or meals ready to eat, and various health and toiletry supplies. Walter and Mary Ann learned that their benefactors were Larry, Jody, and Evelyn, all 3 20-something Air National Guard medics from the 157th Medical Group out of Portsmouth. They were peppy and energetic in spite of their grim tasking, and kept Walter and Mary Ann well informed on developments. Once during that period, another crew arrived and doused the exterior of their house in some sort of red liquid. The crew made no attempt to communicate with Walter or Mary Ann and left when they were finished. The Taraxacum in Memorata reign of terror officially came to an end at the beginning of July, roughly 12 weeks after it started. While traces of the aberrant seeds were still around and not all of the dandelions had been destroyed, a cure had been developed along with a successful new herbicide, so it was decided that it was safe for people to emerge from their homes. Precautions were still to be taken as the fire crews continued their work, but as the president proclaimed, the war at large was over. The final death tally came to just over 1 billion worldwide. China was the hardest hit with 400 million of those losses. The United States was 4th at 90 million, not counting the untold number of pets and livestock that perished. Like most towns and cities, Hanover emerged a shell of its former self, with wide swaths of it burned to the ground, including the university. Walter and Mary Ann elected to relocate to Santa Fe, New Mexico, where they took up posts at the Santa Fe University of Art and Design, one of the few institutions that managed to reopen its doors after the Dandelion ordeal. They bought an estate sale hacienda just outside of town and tried to settle back into normal routines. They kept in contact with Larry, Jody, and Evelyn, as well as a number of former colleagues likewise scattered across the recovering nation. Samuel, still alive, regularly emailed Walter from his new post at Harvard. His messages typically expressed awe at how efficient tea in Memorata had been, and claimed they would be studying it for years to come. One night, after a nice dinner of veggies grown in their own garden, Walter and Mary Ann discussed the possibility of adopting a child. They had already adopted a pair of black labs to keep Bella company, and they felt the next logical step was to become parents. The Dandelions had created a surplus of orphans, and they both agreed it was their responsibility to help alleviate the crisis. Parents at age 50, Walter joked. Wonder if that'd be an issue.
Doubtful,
Marianne said.
The agencies are beyond swamped. As for our age, we'll just have to find ways to stay fit.
Amen to that. Several months later, as Walter and Marianne were getting dressed for an interview concerning the adoption of a 2-year-old girl, Walter received an email from Samuel. Always eager to hear from his old friend, he opened it at once. Walter, greetings from Cambridge. I hope all is well down Santa Fe way. Learned to speak Spanish yet? I have a colleague here who believes Spanish will be more commonly spoken than English in less than a century. Anyway, this group I belong to, called the Watchdogs, corny I know, has been very busy, and I wanted you to get word of our first discovery before its neutered version goes public. As you may have heard, the cure for T. inmemorata is a synthetically modified cocktail of various cancer drugs. What you don't know is it also causes infertility. 79% of those who have taken it have since become sterile, myself included. Ah, well, I'm too old to think about parenting now anyway. On a disturbingly related note, it seems the weed was selective in its targets, killing only those capable of reproduction. Thus far, there has not been any reported case in which the victim was sterile, a discovery that's opened up a whole new can of worms, so to speak. More to follow on that. What else? Oh yes, ever heard of a trait called serotonin? It's an ecological adaptation in which seed-bearing plants release their seeds in response to an environmental trigger. There are various forms of this. The one we're concerned with is necrescence, which is when the seeds are released after the parent plant dies. We're seeing signs of this in the charred earth. While this is of no concern to us this year, next spring it will be, especially since Monsanto's new TI-36 only suppresses the seeds. It doesn't actually kill them. Please keep that to yourself. Well, that's all the time I have for now. We're off to take some more samples. Best regards, Professor Twain. Yes, the name is caught on here too. P.S. I believe we're only scratching the surface of inmemorata. I've got some ideas about its origins, but I'll share those after I get more data. Walter sat in his office chair for a long while, contemplating the missive's excited tone. He decided at last not to hold it against Samuel. His old friend he knew didn't think like normal people, and he had long since forgiven the man his communicative failings. Dishes clinked in the kitchen, Marianne getting things in order before they headed out. Walter closed down his email and went to her. She had dressed in a modest skirt and blouse and had applied minimal makeup. He gazed at her for a trice, quickly marveling at how wonderful she was in so many ways. I love you, he finally said.
Oh, hey there,
she replied.
Love you too. You about ready?
Yep. You?
Nope, but I will be when we get there.
Outside, the sun beat down hard, bleaching the tawny landscape. The Equinox was parked in their half-circle of a driveway. Marianne had already started the engine, so it was nice and frosty when they got in. Before pulling out, Walter studied his front yard, which was really just a bunch of clay and gravel studded by the occasional cactus. 5 in his yard alone. Though looking at them now, he could have sworn there had only been 4 when they moved in. No, you paranoid ass, he told himself. There's always been 5. No more, no less.
Something wrong?
Marianne asked. No, Walter drawled in a terrible southern twang. All's good, little lady. Turning his thoughts to their adoption appointment, he grinned a hopeful grin and edged the Equinox out onto the sizzling street.
Chilling tales for dark nights.